No, just it says update on projects at Citywide. So,
This is the November 12th Planning and Sustainability Commission meeting. On the agenda today, we have items of interest from commissioners, followed by the director's report, consent agenda, which is consideration of the minutes from October 22nd meeting. We will then go into work session on the design overlay zone amendments. And that will be followed by a briefing on the climate action and renewable energy. So items of interest from commissioners. Nothing?
Nothing
Quiet?
interesting.
Okay. Joe, director's report.
Okay, there's 3 items today. The first is just a follow up on the tree code item that was in front of the Planning and Sustainability Commission. It looks like that's going to be considered in 2 separate meetings at City Council. November 13th, Chris is going to represent the commission to transmit your recommendation on the Title 11 or on the tree code, and that's related to just the extension of the sunset date. And then a separate meeting is scheduled for December 5th, which is to consideration of the amendments that the PSC proposed, as well as additional amendments that the Forestry Commission proposed. At City Council also, the second item currently, fossil fuels readoption will be up on November 20th. And the next Better Housing by Design work session, first full work session, will be on November 21st. And then finally, this is last call for anyone interested in participating in the Budget Advisory Committee. Applications are due online November 17th.
Thank you. Okay, so consent agenda, consideration of the minutes from October 22nd.
Move adoption.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? There are none. Julie, I was not present, so I did not participate in that vote. Okay, so design overlay amendments. This is a work session. We have 2 hours for our first DOZA work session. The goal of today's work session is to formulate our testimony, and let's stay focused, please, on the citywide design guidelines. We have other work sessions to get through other items. As a reminder, the Design Commission will make a recommendation on the guidelines to City Council. We make a recommendation to City Council on everything else in the DOZA package. And of course, we're trying to make sure that we get our testimony to the Design Commission before we close the hearing or testimony. We'll start with a brief presentation by staff, and then we're going to discuss the purpose of design review and the 3 tenets of the design guidelines. So, take it away.
Did you want to do disclosures?
Disclosure. Do I want to? Yes, of course I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. She's like, keep reading, Kat, keep reading. At the last meeting, a commissioner shared their potential conflicts of interest. While it's not clear whether the proposed changes create a potential conflict of interest for PSC members because of the changes affect such a broad class of property owners, in the interest of transparency, we have the following declarations. Commissioner Smith owns property in the design overlay zone. Commissioner Schultz, Spivak, Bortolazzo, and Lawrence Spence work for architectural development firms who conduct work in Portland. Do I need to keep reading? You guys got it. I'm like
That's
going
it.
through your notes to me like,
That's it. You can
Thank
pass
you.
it on to us.
take it away.
Thank you, Commissioner Schultz. My name is Sandra Wood. I'm with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and with me today is Laura Lillard. She is the author of these new citywide design guidelines, which is what we're talking about today. Phil Namany is also on our team. He's sitting back there to show you that we're not talking about the design standards today because he's the author of those. We're talking about the guidelines. So we have 3 guidelines to talk about today. This is your first work session. but it's not really the work session on the things you have purview on. What we're going to be concentrating on is volume 3 of the DOZA reports. Those are the citywide design guidelines. And as you can see up on the screen, there's other reports, and we'll get into the other ones later. We've structured the DOZA proposals around these five topics. And in preparing for this meeting, we realized that it's a little difficult to get straight into the design guidelines if you don't really understand or know where we're headed with the purpose of design review. So those two, Proposal 1 and Proposal 5, are really interrelated. The purpose itself really forms the foundation of what we're trying to accomplish with this overlay zone. And as a reminder to you, all properties have a base zone, commercial, industrial, residential, and then the overlay zones are used for a specific purpose. Other overlay zones you might be familiar with are like the environmental overlay zones, if we have a stream or upland river area that we're trying to protect. That's what that overlay zone does. The design review overlay, Laura will get into what the purpose of that one is. Yeah. Okay, so there we are.
So like Sandra mentioned, the purpose statement, and this is Proposal 1 in the Design Overlay Zone Amendments. The purpose statement really sets up the framework of the 3 tenets of context, public realm, and quality and long-term resilience. I'm going to return to this in a minute. I just also want to briefly hit on other parts of the proposal that support and are affected by the design guidelines. So this is a little bit of greatest hits. So just wanted to refer back to this flow chart just to help commissioners understand where the design guidelines fit into the thresholds conversation. Recall that if your project does not hit the thresholds to be exempt, it then falls into the not exempt category, and there's a 2-track system for areas outside of Central City. So applicants can use the design standards in the zoning code, which are the clear and objective prescriptive standards, or they can use or may be required to use the design guidelines through a process called design review. And so today, like Sandra mentioned, we are discussing the design guidelines. Circled in red there, the guidelines are qualitative and descriptive. They are not prescriptive, so there are multiple ways to achieve outcomes through design guidelines. And then the tools, here we see these 3 tenets from the purpose statement that support design overlay zone. These 3 tenets were used to rewrite and organize the new design guidelines and the design standards. But because today we're focusing on design guidelines, I've grayed out the standards for now. But our goal for this process is that the guidelines and standards achieve parity. So just remember that when we're talking about the guidelines, we'll return to the standards and make sure that they achieve parity. Okay. So I mentioned I come back to the purpose. Since it's so foundational, there's definitely a value in checking in about the purpose statement and devoting some time to it. One of the recommendations from the assessment was to clarify and revise the purpose statement around these 3 tenets. They're actually called out in the assessment. They are rooted in the current design guidelines for Portland. They were vetted early in the assessment, and these 3 tenets were being used to organize discussion in the hearings room with Design Commission. So we just wanted to take time to reflect that design overlay is a tool for evolving into the future, especially for areas that will take on more growth. These 3 tenets have buy-in. Context is especially important, and sometimes the area has an established context, and sometimes new development is actually setting the context because it's transforming from a place that may be mostly auto-oriented into a place that is designed for people. Also from the assessment, quality should be expanded beyond building details, so it was broadened to encompass other subjects such as sustainability, energy use, and the ability to adapt over time. It also should address green features that make development more permanent because they provide lasting resilience. And so considerations of energy use should also be incorporated into quality. So all of that came from the assessment. And so at the beginning of this writing of the purpose statement, we took words from the comprehensive plan, specifically from chapters 3, urban form, and chapter 4, design and development. And we went to the Design Commission, as well as this body, in the summer of 2017, as we were developing our work plan, because we wanted to make sure that we got this right before we kept going, since it is the foundation for all of the tools. One of the things that came up with PSC as we were talking about the purpose statement was there was a discussion to make sure there were bumpers in place, so that design overlay isn't trying to do everything everywhere within the areas that it's in place. So we talked about the purpose statement for design overlay, really reflecting the goals of chapters 3 and 4 in the comp plan about sort of the physical manifestation of these goals on a building, on a site. And I'm going to leave it at that for discussion.
Okay. So do we have, I guess, questions back to staff? Maybe we'll start there on the purpose statement.
Yeah. What tenants did you consider that maybe didn't end up in this final 3?
I don't think there was a chopping block of tenants. We did discuss other sort of larger goals that our comprehensive plan sets as more foundational, such as equity. We talked a bit about equity. I don't know if the commissioners that were there recall that in the conversation. Does equity need to be a tenet? And we landed on, at the time, that it shouldn't necessarily be a tenet that then we would develop guidelines from, but it should still be this overarching framework from which, and a lens that we need to look at this purpose statement and look at all the guidelines and the standards, and not just the tools piece of the DOZA amendments project, but also the process. It should inform the whole thing. And so we elected at that time to not include it. I don't recall that there were other tenets necessarily on the chopping block.
And I think these, correct me if I'm wrong, I think these align with what the Design Commission has used as shorthands, even though they have existing guidelines right now, and they do the majority of the work in Central City, which uses the Central City fundamental design guidelines, not the ones that we're replacing with this. And they have been using and thinking that these are the key tenets that they've been invoking already.
That's right.
So, okay, Eli, and then Jeffrey, you kind of leaning in, and then Mike, you had some comments that you had emailed that would relate, I think, to this topic. So to get your head into the, since you just sat
It's
down.
mainly around the guidelines, but
Yeah, there were 2 comments I think that basically would end up getting added
I'll
here.
be happy.
Yeah, okay. So Eli, Jeff, and then Mike.
I'm wondering on the 3rd item on this list, the quality and long-term resilience, how staff thought through the relationship between these guidelines, which apply only to small subsets of the city, and building code and zoning code requirements for, well, green roofs is one example. It's in the zoning code in some places. This sort of would, how do you decide whether those kind of items, green building standards, or that you actually can't see from the street, how do you decide that those go into the design review process versus other parts of our code where those could also be handled?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think that these are probably good tenets and ideas to have in all parts of the city. But in particular to the last one, I think if a developer is outside the design overlay and is bringing those ideas, like the changing demographics, for example, if they're building a development in a part of the city where they're setting the context and they're having community conversations and they're maybe even co-creating a building or co-designing a building with a community, they could absolutely bring those to the forefront. I think one of the points of design review is that the expectation is that that would happen in these particular areas, which is, as you know, we've struggled also with where the D overlay should apply, and that's in the other sections of this proposal.
On that note, we should clarify the next work session is actually going to dive in a little bit about this purpose statement and where you can think about amendments to it. And we're also talking about the map because we recognized, even as we were writing this and talking about it, that it's so integrated to where are we saying that this is a good idea and what's getting left.
So I heard you say we're going to come back at some point and consider changes to the purpose statement, which is fine. I'll raise more a question to come back to. And I noticed in a couple of comments, 2 different people suggested something like this, which has to do with housing. I mean, there is an inherent tension between design overlay regulations and its impact on the cost of housing. Very difficult to quantify, but we know it does have at least some inhibiting effect. It adds cost. And so I'm just wondering whether when we look at the purpose, we would want to add something. And again, a couple of people suggested this about we do design review cognizant of not inhibiting the production of necessary housing for the city. Not my exact words, but something in the purpose statement that recognizes that. Because at least to me, unlike some other desirable goals that are not directly related to design review, housing, I feel, is directly related to design review. It will have an impact. And so should we somehow acknowledge that in the purpose statement? And it sounds like that's a topic for another day, but I just want to put it on the table.
And the reason we were bringing up the purpose today is because the purpose has the 3 tenets, and the 3 tenets is what our launching point is for the guidelines. Yeah.
That was why I didn't want to bog down your discussion. I get it. I mean, as written, it does a good job of setting up what you guys want to talk about today, so that makes sense.
Mike?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I made similar comment regarding the guidelines, but with this, understanding that we are designing the city for people for sure, over the years there's been a lot of sentiment among folks who are interested in conservation that the design commission and the concept of design has not paid enough attention to, the environment surrounding where the proposed development is. And I had in my first draft a very lengthy, while maintaining ecological integrity, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. It sounded a little too much. But what I had suggested was saying something along the lines, what the hell did I say?
You said in harmony with nature.
Yes.
I was preparing in case you didn't make it in time.
Comma, in harmony with nature, which is sounded kind of highfalutin and generic, but it does point out that, and in fact, I'm pleased that there's actually quite a lot of language in the design guidelines that do address natural resources, which is great. But I think that comma is important to say that in that context as well. So that's my only comment on the purpose.
Thank you.
Okay, so, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to build a little bit on what Jeff said. I think it's, I like that the very first bullet is ensure support as a city designed for people. I think it shifts a little bit the focus from a built environment specific part of the code into something that's really focusing on people. And I'm wondering whether really making sure that we don't create obstacles for housing is a way to make sure that happens. I think there's potential unintended consequences. I think some of those concerns were raised in the testimony. I guess we'll have further chance to discuss this.
Any other comments on the purpose? I'll just make a kind of a brief comment with what Jeff and Ben have outlined, and where your comments took me is housing is of critical importance today, and I think will remain so for quite some time. But there may be a time when we could be arguing industrial lands is also of critical importance today,
And have.
Exactly. So, I mean, I guess I'm kind of like, how far do we take that or not? And it's just food for thought. I don't have any answers right now, but it's just kind of trying to figure out the balance of, people need jobs and economy and needs for housing, as well as what we're trying to accomplish here is something we're always wrestling with. And that was just where my head went next. Looks like you were leaning in. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to build off of that a little bit more because I think it's not just an issue of housing, but an issue of affordability in general. Because we've talked a little bit about the issues that come up for commercial space as well, and like who can actually afford to have commercial space in a design review building. So I'd like to encourage us to consider that affordability piece more, and also I think naming the equity pieces more in the purpose statement. I think it's present, but I think we can go a lot further to raise some of the issues that come up related to affordability and equity and affordable housing and how that's potentially affected by design review, and then also culturally specific design. Those are all elements that I think can be named a little bit more in terms of thinking about equity, and in the message that we send to the Design Commission, encouraging the Design Commission to consider those issues more effectively, because I see elements of that throughout the design guidelines, but not necessarily as strongly as it could be present. So a part of where I'll come back to again and again today is bringing up that issue of affordability again, is how do we make sure that that's central, but then also how do we make sure that the design guidelines and our message to the Design Commission is one that really centers equity and ensuring that design review is not creating an undue balance of benefits and burdens.
Are there any other comments on the purpose? If not, I think we can move to the next item.
Okay.
I believe you're going to start walking us through some tenants.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
So first, as an overview, we are proposing a total of 10 guidelines in Volume 3. This is a much shorter set than the 16 in the current design guidelines, which I forgot to bring up today. We had aimed to delete redundancies in the guidelines and put forward one idea per guideline. So that's kind of our MO going forward. Many of the guidelines are actually consistent with current guidelines, such as maintaining a pleasant sidewalk level of buildings or minimizing parking and utilities. And we'll walk through each of these bundled by tenant. And we're going to start with public realm because it tends to be easier to grasp, and the components are very tangible. Before we do that, a couple of notes about the document itself. The Portland Citywide Design Guidelines starts with this preamble on page 10 that gives guidance about the role of these guidelines as a tool for 3 different audiences in the design review process. The applicants, their role with the design guidelines is explaining how their proposal meets each of the design guidelines. The public, their role is weighing in on the proposal and how it meets or does not meet the design guidelines from their lens and their perspective that they bring. Decision makers should be organized and decided, and they should make their decision on whether the proposal meets the guideline or does not meet the guideline. So we wrote this preamble with this specific aim that this would actually be read at the beginning of each hearing by staff. Design Commission already sets the stage in the proceedings in their opening remarks about the process and what to expect in the process, but the staff can then set the expectation on how decisions should be made in the process and what this baseline for decision making is. We also just provided a few little snapshots of the guidelines themselves and just to understand what each of the components is. The design guideline itself is the approval criteria. The background outlines why the guideline is important and what issue it seeks to address. And then there is a diagram and some design approaches. This is a new feature of the design guidelines. Usually the public or the applicants in the current design guidelines have to flip through pages of photo examples to kind of see the real world application of the design guidelines. And we just wanted to add this quick snapshot at the beginning so that the information could be quickly summarized and shown up front with a more generic drawing. The design approaches aren't the only way to meet the design guidelines, but we just sort of wanted to list it all up there in the front. We do still include a double-page spread of examples, and we really sought to give positive examples of the guidelines throughout the city. One of the criticisms of our code and guidelines in general, and we heard this through the comp plan, is that patterns represented are based on an inner corridor streetcar era building. So we really were trying to be mindful in these guidelines to try and represent what success looks like across the city in different areas. So we have some prompting questions, and I'll go through each of the design guidelines by bundle, but we kind of wanted to put these out there for you as part of the discussion as we pause. And the questions, and I'm sure there are other questions that you might have, but do the design guidelines support the 3 tenets laid out in the purpose statement? And is there something missing that would better support the tenets? So just kind of have that in the back of your mind. And I have those questions in front of me. So when the time comes, we can circle back. So we're going to start with the public realm. There are 3 guidelines. Number 5 is about the architecture at the ground level. Number 6 is about the spaces carved out and created by the architecture between the public sidewalk and the building. And number 7 is really about the utilities and parking being designed to defer to the public realm and the spaces created for people. So I'm just going to give a snapshot of each of these. So number 5, design the sidewalk level of buildings to be comfortable, pleasant, and human scaled. There are multiple design approaches to do this. Creating taller ground floor heights, multiple entries and windows for eyes on the street, providing weather protection from the elements, creating lighting, setbacks when there are residential entries on the ground floor or residential uses on the ground floor. Those are all ways to make the sidewalk level of buildings comfortable, and there are some other photographic and written examples of successful ways to create a pleasant ground floor of buildings. So this is number 5. Number 6 is providing opportunities to pause, sit, and interact. And I should say the page number, this is on page number 38. This is really about all the spaces carved, squeezed, in between the building and the public sidewalk that make for really what makes our city a lot more sociable and available for that sort of impromptu gathering. So some of the elements might be seating, ways to integrate bicycles, art and water, creating enclosure, if that's through trees or landscaping or building elements. These are all ways to offer places for gathering and seating. And then finally, number 7 is minimizing and integrating parking and building services. So this includes all of the things that aren't necessarily designed for people specifically. And so what are ways that these functions can be integrated better into the building itself to create that pleasant environment on the street level? So designing vehicle areas and parking that is screened and buffered. How do we integrate utilities, trash, and recycling? Integrating vaults and concealing them. How do you integrate stormwater planters so that they're part of the placemaking and the design of the open spaces? And then how do we create long-term bicycle parking areas so that they're more integrated and useful to folks that are using them? So those are just the examples within the design guidelines themselves. And this is moment of pause, and I put the language from the purpose statement up there just to again ask the question, do the guidelines support the 3 tenets? So in this case, the 1 tenet laid out in the purpose statement, and is there something missing within the guidelines that would better support this tenet?
Ready for discussion?
Ready for discussion.
Okay. Anybody want to start off? Everybody loves it. Eli, go for it.
I'm glad you started with the most important tenet first. I think that if I were going to add something to number 5, I would have varied in there, or somehow capture variety is beneficial for the public realm. I didn't see that elsewhere. And the other thought I had is in the images, every single image has greenery in it. I understand why that's not a requirement, because there might be some sites where it doesn't work on the site, but elevating the value of natural greenery, maybe figuring out how to put a number 6 at the top might be helpful.
Mike?
Yeah, and along those lines, I noticed the images, other than a couple paltry examples, really don't reflect trees that I think are incredibly important when you're talking about the pleasantness of the environment. And you say protecting folks from the weather. I mean, trees are incredibly important in addition to the built environment to both from an urban heat island perspective, and then of course during the winter when we have what used to be one of our typical rainfalls, which is a very almost misty rain. If you have a well-treed area, it's dry. The sidewalk is dry, and so I think both in terms of winter and summer, having something in there that reflects, and this doesn't relate so much, well, it relates to Eli's comment, I guess, that some images that had maybe some more robust urban forest canopy would be helpful as an indication of what we're looking for.
I just want to quickly. I agree with what you're saying, Mike. Street trees are required. So I guess I'm trying to balance, how we're trying to encourage someone to move the needle through a guideline versus, in addition to the requirement. And so I guess trying to keep that in mind. So to me, their image is not of trees along a sidewalk because they're going to have to do that as an applicant. So it's maybe trees in the open space images or something like that, right? To kind of enhance, don't just check the box with your sidewalk trees is I guess where I'm going with that.
And having said what I did, I really like having images for people to look at and have an idea of exactly what we're talking about.
Sorry, I jumped in on there. Oriana, you were next.
Yeah, I think a question that keeps coming up for me in design review and thinking about it is who does it serve? For whom is design review? And I think number 5 starts to get at that and this idea of the overarching equity that Laura mentioned. I'd like to see if equity is an overarching lens for this work, then I'd like to see it more strongly integrated into both the guidelines and the standards. And I think number 5 is a really good opportunity for that. Comfortable, pleasant, and human scaled doesn't start to get at who actually lives in a neighborhood and who is served by the public realm. I'd like us to think about language that we could potentially use that's culturally specific or serves the neighborhood from a neighborhood stability perspective, or thinks about how does that public realm, if you're taking out a corner store that's halal or serves an Ethiopian or Somali community, how do you make sure that the public realm is still serving folks if an essential neighborhood service has been removed, and that public realm is one that actually is responsive to the folks who live in that neighborhood from a cultural perspective.
How does right-of-way factor into design review? I mean, it matters sometimes quite a bit whether you preserve the existing tree in the right-of-way or put in some little ones. The depth of planting wells, is right-of-way work reviewed as part of the design review process?
I'll have Stacy come up.
Maybe you know.
Speak to that, but in general, standard improvements in the public right-of-way are exempt from design review. But then when something is going through design review, Stacy will tell you what that's like.
Okay, thank you.
So that was correct. Typically, standard improvements aren't reviewed. Urban Forestry and PBOT are the 2 bureaus that really regulate what's in the right-of-way. The time that design review does influence what's in the right-of-way is when there is a vault or other conditions that prevent trees from being planted. That's when we typically get involved and try to encourage resolution of those items so we can have a more consistent canopy. So it's when you vary from the standard is when we get involved.
Okay.
When design review gets involved.
And along those lines, we actually had a great tour a couple years ago. I think Eli was part of putting it together, a bicycle tour looking at situations where street trees were not really able to be put in because of vaults and other uses of the right-of-way. And that's a hugely critical issue, just as an aside.
Correct. Basement parking under the right-of-way is another thing that drives the trees to be reduced.
Yeah, I mean, it makes, in the public realm conversation, it would make more sense for holistic review to include the right-of-way. It just seems kind of strange you draw a line down the middle, because even outside of the tree conversation, I mean, you can do a lot with a public works adjustment process to, wiggle a sidewalk or put color in, or there's some latitude sometimes to get some variation that can really enhance the public realm. So I understand. I guess it's helpful for me to know where the line is drawn right now. But if someone wanted to do some creative things in the public right of way, seating sometimes in the right of way, right? That I would think would those elements can enhance the public realm of a new building, the stuff in the right of way. So it'd be interesting. I don't know if it works with this model, but to give people credit for that, for taking the extra mile to work with PBOT to get some adjustments of what's allowed. I would be, if there's a way to give them credit for that, I'd like to do so.
And just to put a finer point on that before you go, Stacy, is it true that if an applicant is proposing to do something with a public right-of-way, something creative and different in the public right-of-way, as Commissioner Spivak is speaking of, that would be folded into the design review process because that would likely be a non-standard improvement in the right-of-way?
That's correct.
Okay, so that conversation happens during the design review process.
Hey, Stacy, before you run, just introduce yourself for the record.
Oh, Stacy Monroe, Bureau of Development Services, Design Review Team.
Thank you.
I like that you think you get to go sit back down. You're going to get some exercise. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Related to 5, I'd love to have a conversation also about accessibility, very specifically universal accessibility. I think I'm weirdly excited about the containers in the right-of-way being curtailed by having vaults for containers, because that's a common issue currently in pedestrian throughway. I think of other ways, like in a few of the examples. There's a few steps to first floor private residences, and I have a personal dream of wouldn't it be lovely to exclude the possibility of that in order to make those more universally accessible, especially for people with disabilities. When we talk about housing affordability, I think we should also be including resilience of people maintaining residence in those spaces across mobility throughout changes throughout their lives.
So I'm going to ask just something for us all to think about on that point, Steph, is so there's actually a lot of there's points in the standards and criteria and the guidelines that kind of address exactly what you addressed in a different way. But it's actually putting residential units on stoops are highly encouraged, which could very much so be in tension, I'll say, versus conflict with ramps. Hard to achieve both. So just something to keep in mind, I guess, is and we'll have to think about it because we're going to start seeing those examples. And what does that mean? I don't have any answers. I'm just pointing out a kind of tension there. Mm-hmm. Any other comments on Guideline 5 before I go through a whole bunch of things?
I do have a clarifying question. I'm here a little bit as a traffic cop and figuring out how we're going to write this letter. We all talked about Guideline 5. At this point, with some of the suggestions we heard today, the Guideline 5 could become really robust. And I guess I would suggest that maybe some of these ideas fall within the design approaches rather than changing of the wording of the guideline itself, so it doesn't become too broad. And I'm wondering what your reaction is to that.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I totally support that. I mean, I'm concerned. I think you did a great job in succinctly capturing the intent, and I think it then falls on staff and the applicant to kind of work through the various permutations. I mean, accessibility is obviously important, but that's embedded in, Kat pointed out some places. So I guess I would agree with that approach and not try to get everyone's sub-issue in the broad context statement. So I agree with you 100%. So you got my vote on that issue.
Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, go ahead, Oriana.
I'd like to push back on that a little bit. While I respect the desire to not have every guideline be a laundry list of all of the things that are encompassed, naming things still matters. And I think especially in sending signals to the Design Commission about what should be considered, assuming that things are assumed in guidelines or standards or points can sometimes lead to them being forgotten or overlooked. So I think if we really care about accessibility, or we care about equity, or we care about how neighborhood folks are interacting with new buildings, then we should think about how do we want to name that in a way that is meaningful and without overly wordsmithing or creating that laundry list. Or if we care about making sure that nature is an essential component, we may want it to be named explicitly so that it's really clear what is meant and what should be considered in those guidelines most importantly.
Other points? Comments? We might have to take a show of hands or something to get there. I'm not sure how we're going to get you answers, Sandra. From my point of view, I guess I support. It's subtle. I agree with you, Oriana, but that it says it to be comfortable, which means comfortable for all, pleasant and human scaled. This particular item doesn't relate to nature so strongly, so we might be able to debate that. But I think you could argue accessibility is in that comment and equity is in that comment. And to the words, make sure that somehow we address it within the background or the design approaches. And for what it's worth, it as a designer who works with these and is going to try to solve for these, this is where I'm going first. Because I'm going to try to, this is broad enough, these statements are broad enough that I can't necessarily solve the problem that I'm challenged with without diving into the examples of the design approaches and the imagery. And so the imagery in that design approach to me is really critical, and you're going to hear a bunch of comments from me on that, as well as the words in the background statement. So that is, I think, making sure it gets embedded in there, I am supportive of. Other comments? Mike.
Well, just to be clear, on this particular guideline, I was much more concerned about the impact on people in terms of providing respite from whether it be heat, extreme heat, or rain or whatever, as opposed to nature per se, although we are in the midst of climate change that's going to result, we know, in much more precipitation. So obviously stormwater management is a part of that as well. So anyway, just as a point.
I like that angle. I see where you're going with it. Makes sense to me. So perhaps, at least for here, maybe a show of hands of, do we feel comfortable with this general statement with some of these ideas that we've brought up being put into the background or the design approach or the imagery as support for that notion, just so that we can kind of give staff some direction on how to take care of our testimony back to commission. So if you're kind of supportive of that, and if you're not sure what I was trying to lay out there, let me know. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3, 3 opposed. I didn't see your hand up, right, Chris? Okay.
And just to put a finer point on that, Laura had asked, what's missing? And one of her parameters that she was trying to do is one idea per guideline. So maybe the idea is that there is a guideline missing, that we need another guideline to express some of these other ideas. When I'm trying to recraft this in my head, the idea of guideline 5 being design the sidewalk level buildings to be comfortable, pleasant, human scaled, varied, green, accessible, culturally specific, contributes to neighborhood stability. It starts to, have so many ideas in it that it's hard for folks to meet. So maybe with some of these other ideas, if it's not satisfactory of having them in design approaches, or if you don't see them in other guidelines. We're on the first guideline right now, so we can come back to
Or
that.
the background. I just wanted to point out the second sentence defines what feeling comfortable is. So on page 34, a strong public realm is framed by built form that supports and feels comfortable to all users, especially our most vulnerable populations, people with disabilities, youth, and historically marginalized people. So that is naming. It's not naming it in the guideline itself or in the design approaches, but the background, I would argue, is a little bit deeper dive of the why and the how. So I just wouldn't throw out the background. That there's a lot of meat in there. So again, the guideline is meant to be general, but if you read into what does comfort mean? What does social interaction mean? What does it mean to be fostering inclusivity? It's in there. If it's not, tell us.
Go ahead, Mike.
And an important question along those lines, I have not attended, I think I've been to one design commission. Does the commission refer back to the background? Because that would be critical if they didn't. then that's all lost.
We do because the guideline itself is so broad, we often refer to the background statement to bolster an argument or support or something or another. So they're very, very valuable to us, and we also work closely with BPS to make sure that these are as effective tools as the approaches and the guideline language itself, because we do rely on it.
Stacy, could you maybe explain a little bit of the process of when an applicant comes in front of design review? And specifically what I'm thinking is an applicant gives you an application and staff puts together a report that then goes to the design commission. Are you wondering where I'm going with this?
No.
I'm looking at that face, or do you have an answer for me?
No, I don't know where you're going with that.
I guess, to be blunt, I just didn't want to speak for staff, but they write a staff report saying, does the applicant, for example, meet 5? So it's not just, I guess, staff who's deeply immersed in understanding these background statements and approaches is laying out an argument for yes or no that then goes to commission, who has to deliberate over whether they agree with staff's interpretation of the proposed design against whether they've met these guidelines. So I think there is a robust understanding of the design guidelines.
Correct.
There. Not that there can't be arguments on interpretation, but there is a pretty robust discussion.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts on... So I guess question for you guys. Are you just, once we get through, like, let's say 5, are you moving on to the next one? We're done talking about design guideline 5, ideally. That's how you've laid out today.
I've laid out today where I talk about each bundle. So we're going to visit context next, and we'll pause at the language from the purpose statement and have the same conversation. And then I think it's totally fair to just have an overarching, did we miss anything? Did something not get spoken? Did we not name something in a guideline that really needed it once we get through all of them, if time allows for that?
Okay, looks to me like Chris is leaning in.
So just trying to understand process. If I want to talk about number 7, do I do that now before we leave this slide?
I would.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we've only talked about 5 so
Right.
far.
Well,
People
I guess
were-
I was thinking we'd go 5 and then 6 and then 7.
Yeah.
Just to keep it clean.
Yes.
I will wait.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to give you kind of a little bit of a shopping list, and I can certainly email this to you. And where I'm going with this is kind of a general organizational concept of I think we need to strengthen the correlation between the standards and the design guidelines. And so I went through all the standards and I went through all the design guidelines, and I tried to find examples of the standards in the guidelines. And I tried to find standards that correlated back to the guideline. I tried to cross-reference everything. I've got a big matrix. I had spent way too much time on it. And some of these design guidelines, to me, correlate really strongly, and others are really not so correlated. So that's where these comments that you're going to get on these different guidelines for me is really focused around. And the reason I think that's really important is I think if there's a project that... as an applicant, if I'm reading the design guidelines and I want to reference the standards and I'm kind of using both to solve, again, for an issue, I should basically be able to use something in the standards as a solution to meet the design guideline. And if not, it seems like we've got a miss there. And vice versa. If there's something in the design guideline that is really highly emphasized, especially, and there's a few of these, but there's not even one standard for it, that seems like another miss. So that's where you're going to get my comments. There's just a minor thing, general statement in the background about oriel windows and balconies. It says, should limit projections in the right-of-way, avoiding deep, heavy bays that dominate the ground plane.
Are you on guideline 5?
Yeah, page 35.
Yeah, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Page 35. It's on the
Second.
Yeah, right there. I think this could end up discouraging oriel windows and balconies altogether. So I'm a little concerned about the way the statements, I can kind of see what you're getting at. It seems like a really strong specific statement in here. So I guess I would suggest that this be striked. I've actually had neighborhoods suggest that we put oriel bay windows in and stuff like that into it to break up the massing of a building. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of seems like, I guess I'm a little bit concerned about that just statement being in here. And that, I think, to me, it's one of those discretionary things, and you work through it when you get to design review. I don't know if people want to comment on that. We certainly, well, let me go through it and then we can go from there. And then I have some concerns on all of them about the imagery that's been selected. And I don't know whether you want me to go through this today or just kind of give you this list. But in general, what I'm seeing is sometimes a lot of images that, again, don't relate to standards or vice versa. So this is where I'm kind of seeing this disconnect. Or it seems like it's an image that relates to something that actually, so here's an example. Image 1 seems to me to relate more to PR 12. Seating adjacent to the main entry, which isn't, when you read PR 12, doesn't even reference guideline 5. Not only that, I think this particular image also doesn't, it violates PR 11, which is ground floor entry obstruction. So I think I have a lot of concerns that way. Like I said, I don't necessarily know that we need to get into the minutia. I can certainly hand this kind of commentary back over to you guys.
Yeah, so I guess I'm curious with the other commissioners. How many of you looked at the imagery and the pictures and are going to have comments about that? Or should we decide that the commission will stay out of the business of testifying about the images themselves?
And that's totally fair. I do want to add just one general comment. And I'm going to say this for each of them. This happens to be one of the guidelines where I think it actually correlates pretty well. 7 of all of the 8 images actually directly correlate to guideline 5. So in general, I think this is a section that is pretty successful in kind of cross-referencing both the standards and the guidelines. And then it's, like I said, just kind of some interesting comments about imagery. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, a process question. So I've sent my comments to all of you, and I think staff have them as well. Much of what I have, in addition to kudos for a lot of great work, I do have specific wordsmithing. Is it acceptable for us as individual commissioners to share our comments with the design commission, aside from the letter that is going in? Because I can see where we may each have our own opinions about things that are not going to make it into our joint letter because it's perceived as or is wordsmithing, for example. How are we going to handle that?
Good question. I guess my gut would be yes.
Yes, my gut would be yes, too. I think the commission should focus on the big issues of the 3 tenants, these conversations about how the alignment is working between the standards and the guidelines is really important because, of course, you'll be making recommendations on one and they're on the other. But I'd like us to focus on the 3 tenets and the guidelines themselves. I know the Design Commission has lots of comments about the imagery. They did before, and Laura's done a great job hearing that and moving this further along. But I guess I would say for the imagery, since is anybody else super excited about the imagery and has lots
Oh, come on, they're excited. They're just
When
not
you say
concerned.
excited, Sandra.
I will pull back on, I will
Yes.
just release mine as a letter.
Yeah,
I don't,
so it
unless,
seems like
and I'll certainly share it with all of you as well, but,
And if you have examples.
yeah,
I'll have an image comment on number 7.
on the guideline itself. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So why don't we do
That's
that, and
super
then
helpful.
everybody can also write a personal letter
Okay.
to the Design
Great.
Commission.
That's fair.
And we're also, when we go to the Design Commission for their second work session, we'll be presenting the commission's letter, not each individual letter.
fair.
Quick
So
question
Go ahead,
on the imagery. I don't have any issues on the imagery because I would just like to see, and I would almost defer to Ben and Kat on this. I mean, should it say these are not intended to be an exclusive litany of acceptable design? I mean, I would just think there's an idea here that's not reflected in any imagery, and some creative architect's going to go, I got a new and different idea. Design commissioner doesn't like and goes, well, I don't see anything in our imagery book that's close to what you proposed, and then shoots it down. And I would hope that's not going to happen because I don't think you could possibly show, an example of every kind of design solution. So I don't know if that's obvious.
So-
A statement like that's not needed, but
On page 8, and this is the sort of how to use this document snapshots of the pages themselves. such a disclaimer is written under the design approaches. The design approaches provide examples of ways to meet the guideline. These approaches function as an extension of the background and are not intended to be used as a checklist of recommended solutions. Other approaches not listed may also be used. On balance, the design approaches employed in the proposal should meet the
Perfect.
design
Thank
guideline.
you. I was hoping you'd show me where that is.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on that? We've now got, a quick 5 minutes for 6 and 7. Just kidding. We'll figure it out.
Just general comment from something you said, Kat. I totally support the idea of a stronger link between standards and guidelines. I haven't delved as much in detail into the standards. I've read it, but probably not as a thorough crosswalk between the two. But my first gut reaction is similar to yours, where there may be opportunities for a stronger connection between the two.
Okay. Ariana.
Looking at number 6, I want to say how much I support the language around spaces are important for community building because they invite social interaction among people from different socioeconomic, generational, and cultural backgrounds. And looking at the exact language of Guideline 6, want to propose that we say provide opportunities to rest and be welcome as opposed to pause, sit, and interact. That's like a very brief interaction, and thinking about who buildings are serving again. Like, are we just serving the folks who live in those buildings? And also naming that just one of the realities of Portland right now, that we have a lot of folks who are unhoused who benefit from some of these spaces that provide weather protection. Like Guideline 5 has a lot of things that can provide those benefits. But I think naming that, like, the spaces that are intended for interaction and for interaction across communities, that it should be more lasting interaction rather than something that's really brief, and that someone who's not from a building can pop in and then not feel very welcome, but more spaces that are truly welcoming in the long term and long scale.
And you, can you repeat again the wording that you were suggesting?
Provide opportunities to rest and be welcome.
Any other comments on that? Steph? Daisy, I'm seeing some thumbs up support.
Thumbs up.
Do we want to just show of hands for support of revising that language? 1, 2, 3, 4. Jeff, was that up? You're
not sure what the words mean, but it's obviously their support words.
5, 6, 7. It looks like pretty much support. I'm supportive of that change with the one exception. I guess I would almost say I'm a little bit concerned about it, as again, I'm trying to solve the problem, but maybe that can be solved in the background about what it means to rest. And in other words, am I providing a place to sleep? And am I supposed to be providing a place to sleep? And so I guess sit and be welcomed, I'm a little bit more supportive of than the rest and be welcomed.
I'd be happy to provide some language for the background that might provide some more context. I understand that there's potentially some controversy here, but I think we also want to be realistic about the ways that buildings and spaces are actually used in Portland. And I think naming that as something that goes a long ways towards creating spaces that are welcoming, and just acknowledge the fact that we have a housing shortage in the city, and that design review can't solve for that completely, but that many of the design elements that exist in option 5 and could exist in option 6 may provide supportive spaces where folks can feel welcome and safe.
I just want to make sure I'm hearing correctly. I was taking your previous language to mean that would replace the guideline language itself.
That's correct, but
Right,
it sounds
okay.
like from Kat, there's some concern in terms of being a little bit more specific about what the problem is that's being solved. And so I'm happy to provide some language for other folks to review and kind of think about where we would comfortably fall as a commission to think about what does it mean to have a more lasting and welcoming interaction with the space, not just folks who are unhoused, but in generally really supporting that language around community building and inviting social interaction across communities.
And that we would take that language and recommend to the design commission that they incorporate it into the background.
Yeah, so that number 6, if we change the language, is made more clear in terms of why, as a commission, we were interested in changing that language to include rest and be welcome, and then also send that signal for folks who are designing what that might mean more in practice.
So that'd be helpful and great. My only consideration here is timeline, and we can't deliberate over email. So I think we kind of have to get at just at least the comment on rest today. And I think we can certainly you could send the letter, I guess, like we were talking about, to the design commission yourself if we can't, since we can't actually deliberate over the specific language in the background. Like I said, I'm so supportive of the notion and the proposal. I am just concerned about the actual word rest. So I guess if there's just maybe a quick show of hands of, is there support to say, and it could be pause, sit, and be welcomed. I don't know, but versus rest, and then use the examples that you're saying to kind of get at more specifically in the background. So,
Can I say one other thing? I just want to clarify you commented on the they invite social interaction among people from different socioeconomic, generational, and cultural backgrounds. So you are striking interact from, is that? Or
Oh
you are
no, just really supportive of that language and hoping that Guideline 6 will like really speak more strongly in its language in support of that opportunity.
So I'm confused. Are you suggesting, Ariana, it would say provide for just this? There's certainly going to be more detail in the background that you're going to suggest. Provide opportunities to pause, sit, interact, and feel welcomed.
No, my recommendation remains the same. Provide opportunities to rest and be welcome. And I do think that rest is significant versus sit, and I don't want to get too much into semantics, but sit is such like a brief interaction with the space. And I do think that there's benefit to folks designing buildings, providing spaces that can be used for rest if that's supportive of the folks who live in that community in that space. Like, again, that's a reality of the place we live in right now and the housing shortage that we have, that actually designing spaces that can be used for rest on a longer term scale, I think is something that I would encourage designers to do more, and hope the guidelines would encourage that as well.
Now I kind of feel like I need to ask you about the semantics because I'm not sure what you mean by rest. Sorry. And I'm trying not to prolong this, but
yeah, okay. So I think, and I'm not a designer, so I may not speak perfectly accurately here, but like looking at some of the examples for 6, there are a lot of benches and things, but not a lot of spaces, or some spaces with overhangs where someone could pitch a tent or rest longer term. I don't want to get into it too much, but there are also versions of defensive design or architecture that have been used like along the highways by ODOT to prevent people from actually resting in spaces. So that consideration of, is this something that is meant for someone to just sit very briefly, or is it space where someone could sit down and have a longer conversation, or someone could actually have space to rest? I think, again, it's more of a temporal thing than anything of sitting a sit. When you sit down, it's often very brief. It's like, oh, I need to check my phone while I'm walking along, versus like a resting space that is one that invites, like, I'm going to read my book here, or I'm going to feel more welcome in this space, that it's not just serving the folks who live in the building itself, but serving the community at large.
okay. Or Eli, go ahead.
I thought part of what you were getting at is all the images show benches with no little ridges on them, and oops, sorry, Jeff.
We're running out of water.
And so the images all show that, but someone could potentially build a bench with ridges every 18 inches, and that I thought that the rest idea would be to say, yeah, you probably shouldn't put ridges every 18 inches because that's limiting it to just sitting versus other uses. So I would be supportive if that's the intent. I'm not sure how broadly construed the rest idea is.
Any other comments, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm concerned that this is going to become quite controversial. You mentioned pitching a tent, and I think if we're asking design review commissioners to consider whether a proposed design for public space would accommodate homeless people pitching tents, I think we're asking design review to take on a far more a public policy issue that's really not conducive to solve as part of design review. I mean, if the groups that are trying to wrestle with the homeless problem came to us and said, would you consider something like this? And they thought it was a valuable contribution to what they're trying to do, I would be far more open-minded to considering it. But I think for us to put into design review some loaded words that suggest we want design commissioners to think about people resting prone for hours, pitching tents, I think we're just putting too great a burden on design review and the whole process of design review. I don't think we're going to be able to effectively address that sort of problematic public policy issue and others like that as design review. I mean, if we try to if design review is supposed to carry too much weight, it will collapse. And so I think this is an example of an important public policy issue that's not well addressed through design review. And so if that's the intent of the word rest, then I would strongly hope you'd reconsider dropping it. I couldn't support that.
Daisy.
Hello. Okay. So I'm also supportive of the word rest. I think if I think about the way people interact with the public realm outside of the US, and I think a lot of you on the commission are pretty well-traveled people. So I imagine you, I don't know, hanging out somewhere in Italy and finding a public area where folks really just hang out there and talk and build community or read a book. So I'm very supportive of the word rest in that, like Oriana said, I think it invites a longer term just hanging out and using of the public space. And I think if that also means folks who are houseless will end up sleeping there or using that space, I don't see an issue there. I think these are also folks from our community. And if part of the intent is to build community, well, we should be looking to build community with our houseless neighbors.
Any other comments?
I do have one point of clarification. So design review applies mainly to private property. So almost all of these examples, these spaces are not public parks. They are open spaces on private property that could be fenced off.
Yeah, so now that I understand the intent of the word rest, I can't support that change. I am very supportive of everybody feeling welcomed. I think pause gets at being able to be there for a period of time. So I'm personally inclined to say provide opportunities to pause, sit, interact, and feel welcomed, or something to that extent. But have to withdraw my support for rest and welcomed personally. Ben?
Well, having grown up in Italy, I think I probably need to make comments here. But I think the crux of the matter here, though, is that we're trying to make these spaces inviting for people, for everybody. But I think we can only go so far in trying to address every issue in town. In Italy, in particular, maybe the homeless situation isn't as acute as here, but there's tons of places where you can rest and you can stop and have a cup of coffee, etc. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do here is promote that social interaction. Beyond that, encouraging places to stop for a very prolonged period of time, maybe overnight, I do think it's beyond the intent. So I can't see myself supporting this.
Other comments? Oh, sorry, Steph, go.
I appreciate this conversation. I really appreciated Commissioner Spivak's use of the word defensive, because I think and how that tension between the welcoming spaces and trying to ensure that certain amenities are only to pause, and for example the 18 inches. I just wonder how to ensure that the amenities that we are putting forward feel more welcoming, feel more permissive, and inclusive. And I don't have a strong relationship between pause and rest. I have I can imagine an understandable preference for rest, because I think that it is a more welcoming, more kind of just that it becomes the public realm as Portland's living room. What inclusivity and welcoming aspects feel like. I guess I'm just talking, but I feel that there has been an increased use of defensive measures recently, and I think that that's unfortunate. And whenever possible, like we should be pushing back on that.
Mike.
You know, I have traveled quite a bit, and I have experienced defensive measures and been asked to move from benches in more than one location. To me, the most significant one, the most important word that I would support adding is welcoming. I hear that over and over that that park isn't welcoming to everybody. So that's, for me, pause and welcoming is kind of where I come down on it. And I think people should be able to sit down and read Tolstoy if they want to for 5 hours.
On private property. Just double. Okay.
So I'll jump in just again, and I don't want us to be really stuck in this space, but just I think to say that we're not solving for a public policy problem here, simply by providing spaces that, to Eli's point and to Steph's point, and to points others have made, that provide more prolonged rest on private property helps bridge that public-private gap that we have. And the idea of the public realm is that it's spaces between private and spaces between public have the opportunity to cross over. And I think it's worth noting that, like, buildings serve all folks in our community, and that rest is language that signifies that again, like, sit is just so brief to me. Rest is one that says that this person can be welcome in this space, in this private space, for a much longer period of time than some, like, a short 18-inch bench might indicate, or other design may indicate. So I think creating welcoming spaces is an idea that, like, helps bring more folks together, helps create more interaction, and I think rest really gets to the heart of that in a way that sit does not.
Okay, I was going to try to wrap up this conversation, but Joe's begging me, and it looks
Well,
like
no, I
Chris
just want to
wants
say I
get in.
appreciate this discussion because it's really helpful. You're going to be working your way through this a lot in this design review process, or this discussion, and daylighting what you think with any particular recommendation is really the mark of success. What does success look like if that's been put into place is really important to clarify understandings, because there are some things that may be considered what you're proposing as success that this is not the tool for, because design review does not really affect use of property. It's not that tool, but it being designed for uses that include these other things that run the gamut from to rest is relevant. But you see what I'm saying? If we're not clear that what you're thinking we're accomplishing with any of these amendments, it's not going to be clear to the staff writing it, and it's not going to be clear to our ability to say this is the right tool to get there.
Chris, did you want to say something?
I was going to make that same point about the difference between physical design and use. So, you could have the most comfortable table in the world, but if it's at an outdoor cafe, I'm probably going to be asked to buy something or leave. And the benches outside the New Seasons in my neighborhood, which are in one of the photos, look very comfortable to lie down on. I suspect if I slept there overnight, the property owners would have me removed for trespassing. So given that we have other laws or commercial customers or whatever that govern use, why should we be afraid to make the physical design inviting?
Okay. So just to be able to move on, let's just do a quick show of hands for Oriana's proposal, which is, since I think some people may have changed, for rest and welcoming. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. You counting total, like I am?
Yeah, there's
1, 2,
9.
3,
So
4,
5
5 to 4.
passes. Okay, so that goes into the letter.
Okay.
And if we could get an extra sentence for the background today would be great. Thank you. Okay, guideline 7.
Looks like Chris would like to add something, so go for it.
Yeah, so getting into the background materials behind this, I'm finding a conflict between bicycle parking and auto parking. And we just use the word parking generally. Integrate makes all the sense in the world for both. Minimize does not. We're definitely, I think, in policy trying to minimize auto parking. In bicycle parking, particularly short-term bicycle parking, we're trying to make that as obvious and accessible as it can be, and I don't think minimize fits. So I'm struggling with how to deal with that distinction. And I would also point out that in the upper left photo on page 44, unless those very heavy-looking doors actually close and lock, that would not meet the standards for long-term bicycle parking. So we should probably find a better example to put in the photos.
Okay. Can I talk about bicycle parking really quickly? We did discuss this a while back in the 3x3, and I think it was kind of a combined thinking with the commissioners present that the short-term bicycle parking should most notably be mentioned and integrated into Guideline 6 with the, at the time, opportunities to pause, sit, and interact, thinking that if you are coming upon a space, you're coming from transit, you're coming from walking, you're biking, and you should be able to find a spot to park your bike, and that in itself is welcoming. And that gives a cue that this is an opportunity for you to pause, sit, hang out. So we incorporated sort of that short-term bicycle parking language in Guideline 6. And then Guideline 7 was more about the long-term bicycle parking. And here's where you could definitely make that claim that integrate is a better, probably a better word than minimize. And if you look at the first sentence, I guess on page 43, it addresses long-term bicycle parking should also be integrated into the site and building design so that the facilities are easily accessible, visible, safe, and active through amenities such as bicycle lobbies and repair amenities. So we certainly weren't trying to say minimize those long-term bicycle opportunities. I think minimize, you're right. Maybe parking is getting conflated here.
Yeah. So I appreciate that, and that language helps. A place where I see more opportunity for conflict is the fact that the code allows a significant portion of the ground floor to be in long-term bicycle parking, including through the glazing in some cases. And I know we adopted a different code than the Design Commission recommended, and I wonder if we're creating a conflict point for ourselves where somebody's going to point at this and say, no, you can't have all those windows looking into the bike room when the code says you can.
Mm-hmm.
To a limited extent, I think Design Commission would remind us. I would be supportive of saying integrate parking and necessary building services, and let the background kind of take it from there. In other words, take the emphasis off of minimize.
Striking the word minimize. I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yeah.
I could support that.
Other reactions to Kat's idea?
Joe?
I just want to clarify, this is about public realm too, because in making sure that we're integrate parking and necessary building services. But the 7 is talking about the impact of doing that on public realm?
On public realm, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how about we just do a show of hands for striking the word minimize and saying instead integrate parking and necessary building services? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, it's everybody. So how about that? There you go. I have a minor comment. I did find it confusing that we've got bike parking addressed in different guidelines, and I just don't know that it has to be. I think it could be cleaner if it was just put into, and to me it makes sense to put it in 7, both short-term and long-term. And I kind of understood it, but I found that confusing personally.
Fair.
It was just auto parking. I mean, no problem. I could insert that.
Okay, we're way behind. Oh, go ahead, Eli.
Holistic on this section, Sandra made me think of it. I would like there to be some reason someone can't just put a gate across the whole frontage, and I'm not sure I saw that in the guidelines. So is that captured I saw a project in my neighborhood, North Portland, where I saw a great rendering with the design review, and I realized, I'll bet they're going to put a gate across that whole thing. And they never mentioned it to the public, but sure enough, that's what they did. Is that captured somehow, or if not, could we capture that in the public realm?
It is
guidelines?
captured,
Okay.
or the language is captured on page 39, where provided larger open spaces such as plazas and entry courtyards should be accessible and open and not feel privatized or exclusive to paying customers. Specifically, gating off is not addressed in here, but that's the closest.
I think the best example we had about that was the art museum, right? Can you speak to that, Stacy? No.
Well, I mean, I can speak to. I have
I
a
don't
number of clients who would really struggle with that. They've got problematic situations in the evenings with security and people who don't feel safe in their building because perhaps they have this semi-public space, or it's a public space during the day, and at night it becomes an issue. And so, and again, it's private property. So I think it's a tough one for Design Commission. I've heard the discussions. It's weighed and talked about quite a bit. And I think they've been doing a pretty good job I would say a great job so far of managing it. Of managing through that and kind of what the pros and cons of that discussion. It looks like Stacy wanted to jump in.
Oh, I was just going to say that while during the process, gates are discouraged. They are exempt from design review if they are under 7 feet. So often we end up seeing the gates come later after activity starts happening and there's a desire to draw a line between the public and private, which doesn't require our review at all or get a permit.
Okay. Are there any other comments on number 7? Nope. Okay. Maybe the next ones will go faster. We'll see.
Oh yeah, context is a really easy one. That's why we jumped with the public realm. Okay, so the new approach is that guidelines for context, telescope, and scale, from thinking about the big picture of the citywide context and the future desired character to the unique site-specific features on the site itself. And there are 4 scales to think and design for within context. So there's 4 guidelines. And I'm just going to quickly go through each of these. So the Citywide Urban Design Framework, this is the first guideline. It sets up a more deliberate relationship between new development and future aspirations in the urban design framework of our comprehensive plan. So at the biggest picture scale, there are layers that should be integrated when looking at this guideline, and they are provided in a legend on page 13, and then explained throughout each of the subsequent pages. And they are pattern area, which is determined how and where the city was developed over time, what features define it broadly. The pattern areas apply to every site. We have western, inner, eastern neighborhoods, and the river. The central city is also a pattern area, but it is not included because these guidelines don't cover the central city. And then the other 3 layers are, if applicable. So not all sites have these other layers. If a site is within a center, along a corridor, or within a transit area, then those would apply. And you can find out where your site is in relationship to the framework from that link. We've developed a mapping tool, and I showed this earlier, I think, in the briefing for those of you who were there. And this is for the applicants, public, and decision makers to determine basic geography of each site and the future aspirations of that site from the comp plan's language and the urban design framework. So this is an example of a site along Division Midway. So this is in the eastern pattern area within the town center. It will also tell you that it's along a civic corridor, and then it shares what the design response is to those things, and that it's not within a transit station area. So just to clarify, this is not the map app for public testimony. This is a totally separate mapping tool that will live beyond the DOZA project, and it will go hand in hand with this design guideline 1. The second guideline is building on character and local identity. This is perhaps the most qualitative and intangible guideline that we have. We've gotten quite a bit of feedback about this, and it's very important, so it probably warrants a bit of discussion. We are pointing applicants, the public and decision makers to draw inspiration from architecture, nature, and the community in thinking about defining character and local identity. So we'd love to hear if those are the right things to draw from. We don't have specific character statements about each area to forward this guideline. There are ideas, I had mentioned this in the future work section in the staff report, volume 1, about how to do that, but that's not in this proposal. So we've put together a list in guideline 2 about describing character and local identity. And we actually added to this list after a lot of public feedback in the discussion draft. So, and we have some of these are more city sanctioned and some of these are more informal points of contact with the community. And some of these are just dependent upon the applicant himself or herself going to the site and observing what gives a place character and identity. And then our last two are zooming in more. The third guideline is about positive relationships with adjacent surroundings. So thinking about if your site is near an adjacent historic resource or landmark, if you're along a vibrant street wall, how should your building respond to that? And then number 4 is really zooming in on the site itself and what are the opportunities presented along the site itself. So whether or not you're on a slope, how are you using and integrating the natural resources on the site? If there are on-site older buildings or historic resources, if there are viewpoints on the site itself, if the site has some sort of social and cultural significance, understanding what that is and how do you incorporate that. And so those are the 4 context guidelines.
Shall we start with the first one?
Yeah.
Questions, comments? Ben, you look like you're ready to say something?
Yes. The inner neighborhoods, page 15, and I don't want to wordsmith this. I think maybe we just stick to the broader concepts and then we send you the notes individually. But in the interest of time, since we have to send testimony this week, I would suggest to replace the word complement right in the middle of the inner neighborhoods paragraph with acknowledge. I think that's perhaps a better way to reflect the historic nature of the context. And on the next one over, Portland Eastern neighborhoods, towards the end of the paragraph, at the same time, development should create mid-block connections. We went through this and better housing by design. There's a parallel study by Ebot that looks at providing additional connections. It seems to imply that it's the whoever's doing a development in a mid-block that you need to provide that connection. So that should, I'm either open to consider like encourage or explore, but it seems like it's going beyond what the target of what we're doing here is, and maybe going beyond what anybody doing development should do.
Mike?
Yeah, again, I've got some wordsmithing I don't think we need to get bogged down with that I'll just submit to the design commission and staff.
Are people generally supportive of the comments that Ben made? We can make those a commission recommendation. Raise your hand. Okay, I think we're there. Anything else on number 1? All right, number 2. Easy.
I just have a question. Was this the one where it said attend a neighborhood contact meeting?
Yes.
And so what is a neighborhood contact meeting? Or what constitutes a neighborhood contact meeting?
Do you want to?
Stacy.
I always make Stacy answer this one. I'm sorry.
Stacy's good at answering this.
So there's a current neighborhood contact requirement that was recently amended, and I'll tell you what it's going to be on December 2nd. believe it's December 2nd. Projects that that are developing throughout the city. It's not specific to zone or overlay. Have to post a site when they're adding so much square feet to the site, and they have to have a meeting if they're adding more than 25,000 square feet to the site. And what the meeting does is it's held by the developer, and it's really an opportunity to share the proposal with the neighborhood, so people get familiar with what's coming to their neighborhood. It's not really an opportunity to it's not a binding meeting, so any comments from the neighbors do not have to be incorporated or into the project or have to be changed. It's just an opportunity to share information and for the applicant or developer to consider the comments. So that will go into effect on December 2nd. And it's kind of like the first opportunity for projects to reach out to the neighborhood and kind of start providing a conversation.
So that came up in the boot camp, and the way I characterize it there is it's basically a mechanism to make sure a neighborhood should never be surprised when development goes up and they don't know what's coming.
Correct.
But I think in the context of design review, it's almost the first round in the process, right? Because if you have projects that go through discretionary design review, then the public is going to get a chance to weigh in formally. So the neighborhood contact meeting almost becomes kind of the first round of that process, right? So it's a little bit different in this context than it would be in by right development.
That's correct. That's a fair statement.
Okay.
Except that it happens outside of the city.
Right.
Right.
Outside of the design review.
Yes.
Yes.
Comes before design review in the
And
process.
it also
right.
could happen with projects that are in the D overlay that are going through standards. What we discovered through the public involvement phase of that project was that really people wanted to just have a heads up that something was going to happen. So therefore the posting of a sign, and it's a big sign on the site, is really what we have advanced for most large development.
Mike?
Yeah, I just want to say I like the nature being included in the graphic on page 23. I've got some wordsmithing on the text that goes with that, but wanted to point out I think the use of headwaters of Tryon Creek development is a particularly good one that really does illustrate integration and creation of natural features by daylighting the stream, and they actually took a pretty poorly designed intersection and created a pretty massive bioswale that added outside of the development itself. So that's a really good image.
Steph?
I know we talked about this in the boot camp. Could you refresh my memory, because I was listening so intently that I forgot to write it down. Is there an opportunity to kind of merge in any way the neighborhood contact meeting and the community engagement processes, to kind of streamline and, incorporate more feedback?
Are you talking about the first two bullets? So what we heard in the feedback, I'm going to just go back to that slide real quick. So what we proposed in the discussion draft was the neighborhood contact meeting, site and area observations, and adopted city policies and plans. And what we heard from the public was that those were all pretty formal, aside from the site and area observations, but there is other engagement that should be honored and should take place outside of the neighborhood contact meeting, because not everybody feels comfortable or is a participant in their neighborhood association. And so we really felt the need to put a second bullet in there that is acknowledging that your own neighbor might not be, in fact, somebody that regularly attends those. So I think that's why we felt that it was important to just go ahead and call that out as something totally separate that may not be the formal neighborhood contact meeting described in the code, but just something else, like who are your neighbors, who are the other community members that aren't necessarily going to those. So that was our...
it's not a requirement or a checklist. So if a developer, for example, wants to hold an open house after in the church across the street, they could absolutely do that. This is our list to tell developers, go engage with the community, find out what the local character is so that you can incorporate it into your design before you come into the city. So it gives them more of a flavor of what's expected and what they can do on their own. That makes sense.
Oriana?
I'd like to propose adding 1 or 2 bullets to this list of how character and local identity are combined. I think there's nothing here that gets at preserving resources that serve a community. It talks about like getting a sense of the community and talking to community, but not also just acknowledging what, whether there's a corner store there that is culturally specific. And the second piece would be adding some element of just culturally responsive design, actually thinking about who lives in the neighborhood and not just who comes to the neighborhood contact meeting or who you can reach through outreach, but thinking about, is there a large immigrant population, a large Somali population, and learning about what design characteristics may be beneficial to support that community through the design, especially of the public realm.
Is that a separate bullet, do you think, or is it in line with the maybe an expansion of the site and area observations to be expansive of the demographics and the culture of the area? Or probably a completely separate bullet, no?
I think
But
it would be a
maybe-
separate bullet.
But it's similar to that, right? Get to know the culture and the community that you're, where you're going to be building.
Exactly.
Okay.
The commission supportive of that conceptually? Okay. Anything else on number 2?
So there were 2 ideas behind that Oriana was suggesting. What was for both of them?
Demographics and culture, right? Okay. All right, let's go on to number 3, and I'll hand it back to Kat at this point.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for filling in for me. Do we have comments on Design Guideline 3?
Go ahead, Ben, because I'm hoping you're going to be better at saying what I was going to say. So.
Oh gosh, I can't read your mind yet.
Well, no, I think I'm reading yours. So.
Similar to what I proposed for number 1, I think on page 27, second paragraphs, replace relate with the knowledge. Along similar lines.
What page? 26?
27.
27.
I'm sorry, can you say that? Page 27, second paragraph.
Actually, first paragraph, second sentence. While new infill may result in taller buildings than its neighbors, it should acknowledge to adjacent historic resources, even while materials and architectural styles may be very different. I think relate implies that you have somehow to mimic or to replicate something that is in the adjacent buildings. There's many different ways to do that. I think acknowledging is a more appropriate way to imply that.
Is there support for that? People want to? Okay. Looks like everybody.
I guess I
Yep.
would ask, well, everyone, but Ben, since you're sort of watching out for language that, I guess let me go back. I think there's sort of an inherent tension between how you sort of acknowledge and recognize the existing architecture in the neighborhood, and yet design something different, and not be forced to replicate what's there. And there's a couple of places I'm seeing language that I wonder if it's too restrictive. For example, the second paragraph on page 26, it talks about complementary architecture. Is complementary architecture, does that allow you to do something different? Or does complementary architecture mean, no, you pretty much have to replicate what's there? So I'm asking particularly Kat and Ben again, is complementary the right word, or is that, or you see what I'm talking about? It's in the middle of the second paragraph. And while you're both wondering, since I put the burden on you to answer my question, I'll go to one other one that's in the same vein. The last sentence in that paragraph says, recognizing underlying zoning in addition to the current adjacent building scale and form. So I read that to mean, well, the zoning allows you to do X, but since the adjacent buildings are built to a Y, we want you to sort of somehow recognize both. And again, I'm wondering if the adjacent zoning, if your zoning allows you to do something, could design review say, we're not going to let you do what your zoning allows because the neighboring business buildings are not as dense, not as tall. And again, I think that's another example of, shouldn't the zoning tell us what you can build and not have design review go, sorry, even though zoning gives you this much FAR, we don't like it because you're adjacent neighborhood. So I'm just trying to be sure we're not pushing the needle too far to the side of mimic what's existing versus giving you the architects the ability to do something different. And I don't know the nuances that affect design well enough to know what the word should be, but that's why I'm sort of looking to some of our architectural experts here to know.
I'm generally personally okay with the word complementary.
Okay.
I would like to strike the sentence that Jeff is referring to, and I have other comments with regards to the imagery in that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of almost 5 imageries that talk about stepping down and related building heights. And the zoning code addresses step downs. And this is leading me to believe of 5 of 8 images that I am required to maybe step down more than the zoning code is telling me I have to step down. To me, I'm like, follow the zoning code. We debated that heavily, and that there's other ways to relate to context. And so I am, I would, that'll be one of my comments on imagery. It's okay to maybe have 1. Mm-hmm. Have 5 is a little excessive to me, especially when it's not even, by the way, a standard. And then, I definitely have issues with that last sentence that Jeff just pulled out.
Sentence. Can I just clarify what the sentence is? Is it the one on page 26?
Yeah, 26. That paragraph that start with positive relationships, and it's recognizing, it's that kind of last clause of that last sentence, recognizing underlying zoning in addition to the current adjacent building scale and form. So it's in conflict. I mean, you have to recognize underlying zoning. Mm-hmm. You're not going to ignore that. So now this is already, I agree with Jeff. It's kind of setting up a tension that you've got the underlying zoning code. We're going to do that. So if you want to talk about, we already talked about complementing architecture and your neighbors, which is basically the current adjacent building scale and form. But if I have a 1-story house next to me and by zoning code and by right, I'm allowed to build 5 stories. We've already set up step downs and step backs in the zoning code. Now I'm going to sit here and argue how much more do I have to step down, reduce my building, reduce my FAR, reduce my height that we have just put into the zoning code is allowed outright. That's my concern. Go ahead, Eli.
Well, I absolutely agree. I think this should be from the whole commission, not just from your letter. I think that this is the most likely place where design review can drive up building costs by having contorted form, because steps are expensive. And we talked about it before. So I guess I would suggest that go into a general comment.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
So
Oriana had her. No?
I think this is a critical question. I guess I wonder if this is the right place to debate it, or at some point as we go through the zoning code, are we going to say explicitly whether design commission can change height as part of design review, or if that's off the table?
I have assumed we would take on that discussion at a later point when we kind of get into the whole what we actually have authority over, and so I plan on bringing that up.
Okay, so this
as well.
This is kind of a precursor for that debate. Okay,
yep.
It is
exactly.
a precursor.
Can I clarify that last sentence?
Sure.
I was just going to say that. Sorry, that is proposal 4, which we are not discussing today. It's proposal 4D. So we will talk about it in a future meeting.
Yeah, I think the point of including that sentence, and you still may think it doesn't belong here. But the point of including it in here was just to sort of remind, again, the audience for this whole document is the public and applicants and the decision makers. So just to again remind everybody that it's not just what you see on the ground. It's not the context so much is about the existing conditions and what's there. But I think we were trying to infuse both with guideline 1 and with guideline 3. It's impossible to talk about adjacent surroundings without thinking to yourself, this isn't just what's there, it's what is possible. So that was the intent, was to think, to help people think that it's not just the existing context on the ground, it's also that's EX, or that's CM3. I'm looking at a 2-story building, or I'm looking at a 1-story building, but that's actually CM3. So I have to recognize it does set up a little bit of attention, acknowledged, but the point of it was just to flag that when you think about adjacent surroundings, you have to think about the underlying zoning, not just the actual physical built surrounding. So I don't know if maybe that still sets up too much of a conflict. It's sort of a flag for everyone to be on the same page.
Are you saying that what I'm hearing you say is that this would be recognized underlying zoning of the current adjacent building scale and form?
Yes.
I think what I'm hearing is there's a bunch of people not interpreting it the way you just described it.
Yeah. Right.
So
that's why I wanted to clarify it.
Or we have an issue with it, and I'm okay with just striking it out of there. I think we all understand underlying zoning's there. I get it. I appreciate the effort. And you cover the adjacent.
Everybody understands, but
maybe we need to be better about those efforts, or maybe it's just a flat out statement that buildings must meet underlying zoning codes, and just not conflate it with other things.
Okay.
Maybe that's a way to get at that. Go ahead, Jeff.
I have a suggestion that there may not be time or interest, but I'll raise it in any event. So the product we're working on today is our recommendation to design review on all these guidelines. I'm wondering if it would help when we deliver this recommendation if we were to say, if we're prepared to say this, we're going to likely adopt zoning regulation that says you can't modify FAR and you can't modify height as part of your design review, because that would both give you, staff, the ability to kind of think through if there's language that needs to be changed, and would kind of let design review know as they're working through their various guidelines, that's going to be a restriction where you intend to impose on them. And again, I realize it's out of sequence, but I think it may be helpful for them as they're going through guidelines and thinking what language is right to know that. I don't know if we're prepared to do just a preliminary head nod so we could tell them that appears to be where we're going without making a definitive decision. But
I personally, I just think as far as process, it's a little bit of a process foul without a big, healthy deliberation and debate on it. And I think that's only fair to give it that. It's a pretty weighty decision. I don't think reading through this personally that I had anything that as I had that in the back of my head, concerned with, in particular about height. I had a lot of step down, step back concerns that I feel are covered in the zoning code, but not.
So that's fine. We don't have to do it today. I guess when I said it, I should have said not just height and FAR, but any zoning. If the zoning allows a building to do something, we may end up telling them that's really not a discretionary item for you to consider as part of design review. So if the code says you don't have to step back, we wouldn't expect them to say you have to do something.
In addition
the code allows
to what the code states.
So just FAR, height, and zoning in general. But I see your point. It may be out of sequence to tackle that now. So I'll withdraw even the suggestion of doing it now.
So I guess maybe just a show of hands of concern about that last sentence before we just assume that. Obviously, I'm concerned. I think it looks like there's support for either striking it or figuring out a way to state that the underlying zoning, to the public, and I get what you're trying to do there, like another way to state that without conflating the two.
And for the record, I had the same concerns about the imagery as far as step backs and the quantity of them.
Okay.
And I know we said we weren't going to testify about the imagery, but since that one's so broad, do we want to do a show of hands to see if we want to include that broad statement about the step downs in these in this guideline?
Sure.
In the letter?
Is there a support for kind of a broad statement about too many images regarding step downs, and kind of obviously then us clarifying why we're concerned about that? Okay, there's support for that.
And the one last thing on this is the Jeff had had questions about the word complementary. Kat said no problem with that.
Yeah, I'm good with her opinion.
Everyone's okay.
Anybody else concerned about complementary? No. Okay.
Guideline 4.
Page 3.
Anybody? Everybody reading it? Any concerns?
Question: is that image on the page 30? Is that the Loaves and Fishes building on Capitol Highway?
No.
No.
Somewhere else? Okay. Sorry, I thought that.
I do have one. I don't think this is picayune. It says on slope sites integrating existing vegetation, et cetera, such as large trees. What does that mean? I think it should just say trees.
I'm sorry, where were you, Mike?
On page 30,
Mm-hmm.
top paragraph, on slope sites, et cetera, down to incorporating natural resources such as large trees.
Why qualify it?
I think it just should say trees.
Okay.
You're going to have, what's large? Is it 6 inches, 3 inches, 24 inches?
I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, but I also struggle a little bit knowing that we could get into quite a debate on it. So, but we're going to get in a debate either way.
Exactly.
Either way, I know. Like I said, I know where you're going with it, and I'm also like,
Okay, to me, that's not wordsmithing. That's a very substantive issue.
understand. So, is there support for striking the qualifier large in that statement? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 to 4. So, guess so. Okay. Any other? Yep. Go ahead, Eli.
The image on 31 that we heard a lot of testimony about historic buildings. You step back and then you go up. Does it ever happen, or is it just the stepping's too? If it ever happens, then they're okay to, like in the neighborhoods, then we can include the image here. But if it's something like it's a unicorn, that's the dream that doesn't actually work financially, then I'd rather not show it.
It happens. We have some examples. I don't know if I.
One on downtown on 33.
Oh, there's quite a few.
Yeah.
Any other comments? If not, I think we're good with guideline 4.
Okay. So I will move towards the last tenet. So this is the quality and resilience. Guideline 8. Actually, first of all, guidelines 8 and 10 go beyond what we think of in terms of designing for quality. Specifically, Guideline 8 asserts that quality is not just about the building in terms of its materials and construction, but also about the whole site and how the site's design relates to the quality of experience for workers, residents, and visitors. So this approach for the whole site is new, and it's more responsive to development that we see where the sites are quite large or quite deep, especially in our eastern and western pattern areas. Guideline 9 is a typical design guideline that speaks to the quality of materials and strategies and overall consistent building design. Guideline 10 includes how we design for resilience, thinking about the adaptability of a building over time and its carbon footprint. We're raising the bar here and promoting awareness of our climate action goals by weaving these into a holistic view of the site and the building. So guideline 8, support the comfort, safety, and dignity of residents, workers, and visitors through thoughtful site design. And this is thinking about offering multifunctional spaces, using internal vehicle areas, again, in multifunctional ways to ensure that they don't dominate the site. And then providing solar access to the open areas. And sort of eyes on the street, but in terms of internal site design. Guideline 9, design for quality using enduring materials and strategies with a clear and consistent approach. So this is about the building's form and expression, about unifying the building, using articulation, and how you use your exterior materials to express the building design. What's the quality of the materials? The durability and construction and the execution of details, and including building openings and balconies. And guideline 10, design for resilience, health, and stewardship of the environment, ensuring adaptability to climate change and the evolving needs of the city. So this is about providing flexibility in buildings, conserving resources, incorporating native landscaping and eco roofs, incorporating bird-safe design, providing ventilation, daylight, improving indoor air quality, and finding places for on-site stormwater are examples of design approaches. And as with all of these design guidelines, there's many other approaches that are described in the background statement, but these are the ones that are highlighted. And so here's the tenet as listed in the purpose statement.
Okay, so starting with 8, are there any comments? Concerns? No?
Nice job getting a picture of Bach-Feets in there.
Okay. Number 8 then, moving on.
9.
9, sorry. Thank you. I have some things, but I'm waiting. No? Okay. I guess I had one question because I'm not sure what you meant in the design approaches by on the building openings heading. I find that sentence, I think I know where you might be going with it, but I find that confusing. So the sentence is, or suggestion is offering permeability and depth from contrasting shadow lines.
Yeah. So this is just about building openings is windows, balconies, doorways, anything that allows you to penetrate the wall of the building. And so the permeability is referring to, and we can certainly broaden this language and make it more accessible, but I'll just tell you what I mean, and then maybe we can, we'll take the suggestion of making this more accessible language. Permeability is just allowing that sense of openness and welcome. And then the depth is really the visual cues and the sort of thinking about the building and the way it's articulated through these building openings. So knowing that that storefront is a door, in fact, and not just glazing, not just a window. So that's also a way to offer sort of a contrast with the shadow lines and make sure that you know that that's a welcome place to enter and exit. So I think that's what was meant by the permeability and contrasting shadow lines.
I knew that's where you were going. I don't get it from that sentence.
Sure.
What's confusing to me, I understand where you're going with permeability. That's quite clear. I get kind of the depth. It's the front contrasting shadow lines that I started to go, hold on, I don't understand what's meant by that. So I don't know that I have a correct answer,
Okay.
a thought at the moment on cleaning up that particular one, but I don't know that it quite clarifies what you were trying to accomplish. And I'll have to give it some thought.
Okay.
Maybe it's just offering permeability and changes in facade depth to create shadow lines or something like that, because I think that's what you're trying to get at. And then this is hard for me for a number of reasons, but it's the comment on the execution of details. I know where that's coming from, but I also know that, and it's also, if I remember right, one of the things that came out of the assessment is how much time we in Portland spend on arguing about details of facades. And again, having been on the design commission, I completely understand the discussion and the struggle, but I think we spend way too much time on it, and I think this is just opening the door right back to that. And I don't know that we really give enough background, and maybe you can point some things out to me that explain what we mean by that. By that last little bit on that sentence of quality of materials. Sorry, I didn't.
Where are you? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's my bad. So on the page 51, design approach, quality and materials, it says provide quality, resilience, and durability in construction and execution of details. So I can see what's still going to happen is we're going to spend a lot of time talking about execution of details, and it's like one sentence in this whole discussion. So I'm kind of of a split mind of either take it out of the design approach, or let's be honest and confront it in the background and address what it is we mean by that sentence. Like, are we going to sit there and talk about details all day long, and where is it really important, and maybe we call it where those details are important. That type of thing.
This guideline was, so from the assessment, we did hear a lot of, as you recall, a lot of feedback that there was too much time being spent on details. There are two guidelines that this one combines. One is about quality and permanence. I think there are guidelines about quality and permanence, and then there's another guideline about coherence. We were really intentional about combining those so that we could just have the conversation with one guideline rather than having it twice. And so that was one way of sort of bundling that together and hopefully not spending a whole bunch of time on that piece compared to the other pieces that are equally important.
I appreciate that, but I suspect you're still going to spend just as much time talking about details if it's left in there. And like I said, either my suggestion is if we're going to leave it, let's define what we're talking about and let's just focus, or let's strike it. That doesn't mean it's not going to come up in discussion just because it's removed, by the way. I mean, that's just my thoughts on that.
Others' reaction to that
yeah.
and whether we should include that piece in the letter? I guess there's two things that you've made observations about, the conversation about the building openings.
Yeah, and to me, it's just clarifying that sentence. I'm supportive of the intent.
Others agree
So
with
I
that?
guess is there support for clarifying that sentence? Looks like it.
Okay.
And then it's the suggestion of either deleting the reference to the execution of details, or I guess being more specific about what we mean by that. Because it can mean a lot of things, by the way. So it goes right back to a pretty broad discussion.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Are you suggesting that the entire approach be struck or just that last?
I was thinking just that last and execution of details. Okay. Just removing it seems easy. But so I guess supportive hands for just removing that last kind of little phrase on that design approach. Looks like we have support for that. Okay. Why do I suspect my fellow commissioners are ready to move to number 10?
I have one final comment on page 51, first paragraph, where it talks about masonry that should be used at the ground level. I totally get it. I think it's a very common approach for durability, but I don't know, it feels somewhat limiting and kind of limiting the expression of design. There's other expressions where you may not have it at the ground floor, have it somewhere else. So it feels like it's a little restrictive, and I'm not sure if it really relates to the purpose of number 9, really designing for quality. Brick is not the only quality material. There may be other approaches to it. It seems a little maybe down to the weeds.
So question, Ben, if you struck it says like masonry, and it says heavier materials should be used at ground level. and lighter materials deployed on upper stories. Does that get at what you're getting at, or are you concerned with kind of a whole general description and concept?
I'm kind of concerned about the whole general description simply because I think this implies somewhat of a traditional approach to architecture where you have the heavier materials at the bottom, and that's kind of reflective of how construction methods were, in the past. There's other ways to do it. So it feels like it might be perhaps trying to convey designers into a direction where it's like, we really need to have this kind of traditional approach where others may be appropriate.
I actually agree, and you've got a couple images that would be contrary to that statement, as a matter of fact, and I'm guessing you feel are successful. So I'm personally in support of deleting that sentence. So show of hands for, looks like there is support for deleting that
Just
sentence.
to clarify, are we deleting two sentences? Materials can also convey hierarchy, period, and then heavier materials like masonry,
I personally am okay that they can convey hierarchy, but they can do it without necessarily putting heavier materials. They can. So I'm okay with that statement myself, but if somebody wants to throw that out there as an additional item for discussion, happy to.
And for the education of the rest of us, what are the images that you think don't do that? Just so we can all learn.
That are masonry, that heavier materials like masonry. So
Maybe are not at the bottom.
Well, so example, the first image in the upper left-hand corner has lighter building materials at the base, it appears. Storefronts, a lighter material that we use at the base of buildings all the time. So you could say the bottom image, the second one in.
Top right.
The top right, maybe. It's hard to tell exactly what's going on. The image is dark with what I have.
So if that was all glass on the bottom floor, then the top is heavier in that case.
Exactly.
I'm not trying to push back. I'm trying to
exactly.
have a shared vocabulary amongst all of us. Okay.
I'm sorry. I have a question about what we voted on. You suggested we get rid of the language execution of detail where it says quality of materials.
Correct.
I guess I'd ask you to be sure you've read a sentence that seems to say the same thing, and I don't know if we're including it in the background, which is second paragraph, page 51, that begins with building facades particularly warrant special attention to detail and quality. That seems to me, if I'm being consistent, if I'm understanding what we already did, we would get rid of attention to detail there as well, or is that somehow a different context?
I would read that as a different context. So, we refer to when we bring two materials together as details. So as an architect, we're detailing of how you solve for that. And that's what I read as in the execution of detail. So how we execute bringing materials together versus the detail of a design or a
Texture.
Or so,
attention to detail is different than execution of details.
Yeah,
I think that's what you're getting
that
at.
says it well.
As a layman, I don't get it, but I'll defer to the more experienced
But thank you for
designers.
making sure I wasn't missing something. I appreciate that. Any other comments? Okay. Number 10.
Number 10.
Any comments? Go ahead, Eli.
All right. Well, I may not be popular with this one. I think I'm not sure why 10 is in here. I think that as I read through it, rooftop solar, native landscaping, eco roofs, bird safe, indoor air quality, on-site stormwater, those all seem like building code or base code issues, and I've voted in support of many of these and other, like in base codes. But remembering that design review just applies to little patchworks of the city, why there would be different rules in those areas from other parts of the city. It seems like it's kind of a laundry list of things that don't really get at the public realm. Many of them you can't even see from the street. And if you want to have two tiers of code, I can see the reason for like a stretch code or a reach code in some areas, just like what we want to do if we went a little further. But if we were going to set up two different levels of code for buildings, I would rather have it be not based on this random geometries of different parts of the city. All these cost money, and it would make it harder to build housing in some of the areas that we want to see it built. So I have a general concern with, I think this is probably more broadly to the whole quality section of the code, but it particularly comes out in number 10 for me.
Go ahead, Mike.
And not surprisingly, I would disagree heartily. Actually, I've got an issue with some wording first, and I was going to say I really like all the language in there, and particularly that eco-roofs providing and getting beyond stormwater control solely, which is actually how the whole eco-roof program got started, that it's for habitat for pollinators in particular and for people. And in fact, eco-roofs, if they're done properly, in addition to providing habitat, actually provide great access to green spaces in areas that are park deficient or green space deficient. So I have a slightly different take on it. The concern, the word of concern I have, and it kind of fits into my weasel word category, like try to or consider. Where in the 4th paragraph it says where possible, development should incorporate native shrubs and trees and landscaping, et cetera, where possible, it's like, well, sorry, it's not possible here, is how that gets interpreted in my experience. And to me, it seems like it should say development should strive to do those things. And strive is not a mandate, it's not mandatory, but you should make an effort. It's more an active as opposed to, well, just think about it. So that again is not, to me, it's not wordsmithing, it's changing the action in that particular paragraph.
Oriana?
So I'm going to try to bridge kind of where Eli and Mike are at, because I see both of your perspectives really strongly. I think the issues you're raising, Eli, maybe get more to our conversation next week, which is kind of what in design review should be kind of focused more towards standards or code, or what should be in the base code versus what's kind of in this more discretionary space. But I think if we're going to have this discretionary space and we're going to have 8 and 9, it's crucial to also have 10 and make sure that we're really codifying some of these concerns associated with energy efficiency. I'd like to see generation added to the background as well. Like we have lots of pictures of solar panels, but we're nowhere really naming that as a function. And see that maybe we have a bigger conversation to have when we meet next about kind of the purpose of design review and to the housing affordability issues that have been raised by both Jeff and Ben. I think that feels more appropriate for there, but I think in terms of talking to the Design Commission and acknowledging that we have these guidelines in place, it wouldn't make sense to me to remove 10 without having that bigger conversation first about what we're kind of doing with design review and what goes in the base code versus what goes in the more discretionary process.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and I'm speaking of solar panels. I'm pleased to see the reference to and or as opposed to solar or eco roofs, and there's a lot of research that's been done that actually documents that solar is more efficient when combined with eco roofs. So I'm glad it's and or.
Great. Chris?
So just trying to place this in the larger context and answer the question Eli and Mike are debating. Design review is about the places that are going to see the most intense development. We have an eco-roof standard in the central city, presumably because it is the most intense place. Doesn't seem out of place to me. And then to use the construct the chair mentioned at the beginning, there are corresponding standards to these, right? You can get points for all of these things. So if we're keeping the guidelines and standards related, if we're going to take them out of the guidelines, we should take them out of the standards too, right? So those are isolated decisions, so it's a little tricky, but it seems to me it fits together.
Go ahead, Eli.
I mean, Oriana's correct. I am bringing this up here because I want them to be parallel, and I will bring it up more in the standards discussion. But interesting, Chris, you said that design review is where the most intense development. And I looked at the code, and that's not where design review is said. Design review is according to the directions. I'm not going to quote this exactly right. It's where more design intention is needed or something like that. It's pretty loosey, but I wonder if it actually does map to where the cities have the highest intensity development. So I guess if that were the case, then that would make a point to have a stepped up code, although I would think the best way to do it is to step up the zoning code in those areas of the city, or step up the building code. If you're building a building over this size, this height, you have to do more things for indoor air quality, for example. But I'm not sure I'd go with that assumption that this is where actually design overlay is located right now in the city of Portland. And I'm not sure why, like when I think of design review in the committee, I think of people looking at the design of a building. I mean, does it matter, like even back to number 8, thoughtful site design for the interior of a space? I mean, does it make sense that you have a higher standard and more review for a deep lot in an area with overlay zone versus a deep lot somewhere else? It seems like scope creep of design commission to interact in things you cannot even see from the street. It just seems like I'm not sure that if I were starting from scratch, if the design commission would be looking through into the air circulation system of a building and, what's on the building's roof, frankly. I mean, I think that I would much rather, and I know we have an inherited system here, but those seem like questions to be answered by other parts of the code.
So we are 15 minutes over at this point. This is going to be a great hearty debate, I think, as we move forward. So I'd love to table that a little bit, try to focus on 10. For what this is worth, Mike, I do support your change to Strive. I think that's great. My take on it, first of all, was I applaud the guideline. I am supportive of the city moving here. I work in other jurisdictions who have these as part of kind of their goals and guidelines. To me, the guidelines are less onerous than putting it in code. So I'd rather have it here for places that we don't feel the code quite needs to mandate them yet. What's going to be interesting, though, is these may very well be out of date pretty quickly as code in time changes to adopt some of these things. So it's just something to think about. Like I said, I'm generally very supportive of this, and I'm glad to see it. I think it helps move us forward on our climate action goals. So there's that bigger picture. It helps tie the design guidelines to more than further back into our comprehensive plan goals. So, like I said, I like where you've gone with it and appreciate the efforts on it. Okay, so. But that being said, I think Eli's question whether we should even have this as a guideline, so it seems only fair to kind of get a raise of hands unless there's more deliberation on that as an item. Is there any more thoughts that people would like to add or question? If not, so maybe a show of hands of, I guess this would be striking it in altogether is kind of what I'm hearing from you, Eli. Would that be correct?
No, I'm fine not putting this to vote because I'm not going to win anyway. But
You want to put your mic on, please?
I don't need to put it to a vote here. It was a preview of some things I'll bring up when we get to the code part of it.
You'd get one vote, Eli.
All right, let's put it to a vote right now.
Yeah, you may get more than you think.
Okay, I vote that we strike this section.
Okay, so a show of hands in support of striking guideline 10. There are 2 individuals who support that.
I agree with scope creep.
Okay, so what next? What more direction do you need from us?
I do need, did people agree with Mike's suggestion that sentence read development
yes.
should strive to instead of?
Good question. All in favor of changing that sentence to striving instead of when possible. It looks like you have pretty much full support there.
Great. And the last thing was, we forgot to tell you at the beginning of this conversation that you can very well also give positive support for things that you really liked. So I'm just going to probe you a little bit on guideline 8. No one had any suggestions for changing it. Is that because it was a great guideline, very well worded, and we can tell the design commission that that's a good one?
Sure.
I just want to say thank you all. I really appreciate seeing the thoughtfulness in that one, and that it included thinking about dignity and workers and just all the people who use the space. So kudos to you all.
Yeah, I can't express enough what a monumental improvement this is over the tools that we've had to date. And I think while we nitpicked, I would say it was really kind of nitpicking. I mean, really. So I think there's general support of pretty much everything in here, with some, like I said, minor changes, and it's definitely on a great course. I have one thing that I'll offer as food for thought. I think this is such an improvement that I don't understand why we're not replacing the Central City Fundamental Design Guidelines with these, and would love to bring that up for discussion later. So
We'll consider that.
So we'll look forward to debating that one in the future.
Okay.
But I think they're just that much better.
Great. So we have some next steps up on the slide for right now. As you know, and we've said in the email, we are on a really fast clip to get the letter out because our testimony closes, the written testimony closes at 5 o'clock on November 15th. So Julie has doing our team a favor and drafting the letter. I think it really helped with the votes today. So we'll get that to you on Thursday is our plan. So please take a look at your email on Thursday, and so you can review the letter and get us any edits. Our plan is to have the chair, Kat, if she's available, to come to Design Commission on December 5th to present the commission's testimony. And then we go next week, we'll see you actually at a work session. So is it the same time or is it the evening? I think it's an evening meeting next week. It should be on your calendars. We'll have our second work session. So then we're starting to delve into volume 2, which is actually in your purview. So we'll do real amendments and real votes. We'll revisit the purpose statement, see if there's any changes there, the map, and the thresholds, but I think that's probably the place where we'll have the bigger discussion of like why some areas and not other areas. Also, the notion of what is design review? Is it just about what folks perceive in the street about the building, or are we getting on site? I heard Eli talking about that. We're taking with this project a step getting further into the site with that guideline number 8. Was our intent on doing that. And then we'll have work session 3 in December about the standards themselves and the process improvements. And then we'll pause, and hopefully the Design Commission will be at a spot that they can also pause, and we'll have the 3x3 discussion in case the commissions are veering from each other. And then in January, maybe there'll be a vote. That's what our plan is.
Do you want to just
We're going to
clarify?
strive for a vote in January.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know commissioners expressed interest in writing their own testimony to Design Commission, so they would need to do that via the MAP app.
Correct.
Okay.
By 5 o'clock on Friday. Yes. So you'll submit it there. Okay.
Great.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
you both putting all that hard work into it and bearing with us through this.
Thank you.
Many more work sessions to come.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the Climate Action and Renewable Energy Briefing. We have been running a little bit behind. This was an hour and a half agenda item, and we're getting started late here. So is there a show of hands for those who can stay a little bit later if need be? We lost some people, so I'm still not sure if we have a quorum. I'm going to have to leave. So Chris, Jeff has to leave. Okay, I'm going to ask you to just go ahead and start chairing this. Let's see when everybody gets back if we're going to have some quorum issues or challenge you to be speedy. But I'd love to give you as much time as you need.
Do you want us to just get started, or should we wait a couple minutes?
I'm kind of one.
You're okay.
Okay. Huh? Okay. So let's I guess go ahead and get started. Daisy, are you able to stay a little bit later or not? You're gonna have to go. I would recommend, if you guys can, to try to target being finished by 4. Yes. On the agenda, we had targeted a 4 o'clock adjournment. So why don't you guys go ahead and get started so we don't waste any more time. And I'm going to let Chris take from here since I will have to leave early.
Okay.
Thank you. Please introduce
Okay.
yourselves.
All right. So my name's Michelle Krim. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer. I work in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And with me are some colleagues from BPS. And we have several briefings that we want to give you. We will give you abbreviated briefings on these topics just to really, in many ways, get a conversation started with you so that we have heard from several of you the desire for sustainability and climate work to come before you more frequently. And so this is just the first of several of those interactions. And if we don't have time today, maybe at a future meeting or through some other avenues, we can explore what that ideally would look like to you, like what sorts of topics you would like to see coming to you, and what you would like those interactions to look like. So if we don't have time to get fully into that today, we will do that soon. And so today what we wanted to do is just share with you some basic information on a couple of different things. Kyle Diesner is going to give you an update on our emissions trend, just to give you a good grounding in where Portland's carbon emissions come from and what those trends look like. Andrea Jacob is going to give you an update on our work related to getting to 100% renewable energy and the council resolution associated with that will soon be bringing a progress report update to City Council on. I will share a little bit about sort of a progress on implementing our current climate action plan and climate emergency declaration we've been working on. And then Elisa Kane will share with you our vision for what the city's climate work will look like going forward. So with that, we're all prepared to sort of shorten our presentations for you. And so I'll turn it over to Kyle so he can get going.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Thanks for having me here. I'm going to really try to take a bunch of time out of the emissions trends. So I'm going to go fast and I'm going to keep it at 10,000 feet, but I don't want to lose you. So please, Chair Schultz, let me know if there are questions. I'm happy to pause briefly to catch people up if necessary. So first, I just wanted to lay the groundwork here with global carbon emissions. The IPCC put out a report just about a year ago, really setting the target to get to net zero emissions by 2050. And what this meant is that if global emissions peaked, if you can see on this chart, 2020, if global emissions could peak next year and drop to 2050 to zero, that would be 600 gigatons of CO2, which is 100 gigatons beyond the budget that we need to hold global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what the IPCC said is that, well, it's not going to cut it. So they said we have to get to 50% by 2030 in order to reduce that to 500 gigatons of CO2e. And, you know, the reason I put this up here is because that 50% is actually a pretty important figure for us. If we don't hit the 50%, say we hit 20%, we have to hit net zero much sooner, in this case by 2039. So by hitting 50% in 2030, we buy us some time out in the later years where we really need advances in technology and new tools that we don't have available to us today. So I'm showing this to you to really emphasize that bold action early will be critical for our success. Currently, City Council has adopted a goal of 80% reduction by 2050, but Mayor Charlie Hales signed on to deadline 2020 and the Global Covenant of Mayors committing us to net zero by 2050. And of course, City Council adopted the 100% renewable resolution, which does virtually gets us there as well. So I just wanted to overview of all the emission inventories we have. We have a lot. The first 5 you see up there are community-wide inventories. They cover emissions produced in the community, either production-based, sector-based emissions produced here, or consumption-based emissions that are produced globally as the result of consumer spending. We also have the 2 inventories for city operations. The data I'm sharing with you today is just sector-based emission inventory with IPCC's 4th assessment, global warming potential factors. So we could do deep dives into all of these at some point, but today I'm keeping it at the high level here. So our emissions are currently 15% below 1990 levels. We made steady progress in reducing emissions from our peak in 2000, but those reductions have really started to plateau in the last few years. So we're seeing a need for accelerated action. In 2017, we actually saw a 6% increase in emissions. That had to do with increased driving and extreme winter heating requirements the winter of 2017. This is a success story, though. We've reduced emissions 38% per person since 1990. That is really remarkable, given how many people we've added to Portland, how many new jobs we have. So these are significant reductions, significant progress, and we should be proud of that. But we really have a lot more that we have to do. Today, you can see our emissions. 42% are coming from transportation. Really dominates the chart right there. So really we need to start focusing more on transportation sector emissions. Other emissions have come down, and we can talk about that as we move forward. Emissions by source, so 28% of our emissions come from electricity, followed by gasoline, transportation fuel, followed by natural gas, typically used as a home heating fuel and for hot water, and then followed by diesel fuel. What I will note is that if you took the natural gas out of the electricity generation, natural gas would be the single largest source of our local emissions. Emissions have dropped in all sensed sectors since our peak in 2000, except for transportation. Transportation sector emissions are now 8% higher than they were in 1990. They're really going in the wrong direction compared to other sectors. You'll see fugitive emissions are also up there over on the right. That's because most of that data is modeled and based on population. So as we grow, those fugitive projections grow as well. I wanted to put this up here. I know it's a lot to look at, but I think it helps break down to understand what's going on within those numbers. So I'm going to talk you through this using my little handy pointer up here with the little laser so you can see where I'm talking. So we've got 30% population growth and 34% job growth between 1990 and 2017. And if you look at the yellow, the red, the brown, these correspond to our pie chart over here with their share of overall emissions. So you can see energy use per person in the residential sector down 9%. That's energy efficiency in our homes. A lot more work that we could do there. But emissions per unit of energy, so this is the carbon intensity of energy use in the residential sector, has really fallen significantly because of local investment in voluntary green power programs as well as solar generation. On the commercial sector, the red, you can also see really significant investments in efficiency, that energy use per job down 28%. There's a real business case for businesses to invest in efficiency there. So much more progress there in the commercial sector than we have seen in the residential sector. Emissions per unit of energy in the commercial sector are also down 23%, and that is, again, uptake of voluntary green power programs in the commercial sector. Transportation sector, energy use per person is down 20%, so more people are driving more efficient vehicles, they're taking active transportation, taking public transit. But we've made very little progress on reducing the carbon intensity of our transportation energy use through tools like the Renewable Fuel Standard and the State Clean Fuels Program. So there's really an opportunity there. We've had significant reductions from waste as well as wastewater treatment. And if you multiply those by their share of overall emissions, you can see how they stack up to get to our 15% change overall, with fugitive emissions and transportation emissions up and the other sectors really doing the lion's share of work to reduce our emissions to 15%. Really, commercial and industrial sector bearing the brunt of that reduction to date. Moving on, you'll notice that the latter years there, the line is pretty uneven for the trend. I just wanted to explain that a little bit. So what we've seen is the grid has become much more dominated by renewable energy. It's much more susceptible to changes in temperature and climate. So here we had low rainfall years with low hydro generation, emissions were higher. Where we had high rainfall and hydro generation, the emissions were dropped a lot lower. So we saw about a 10% swing in emissions due to hydro generation. In 2017, hydro was also high that year, but we had a really cold winter and increased driving, particularly in the commercial and industrial sectors. This is our weighted average for our grid electricity, and 63% of our energy is still from fossil fuels. So I just wanted to put this up here because it's an important reminder as we focus on decarbonization that greening the grid is also a critical part of this equation. Electricity sales have been, relatively flat. I mean, they're about at the same as they were in 1990. And they peaked right in 2000. You can see the voluntary green power there. It makes up 10% of our total electricity sales. So it's really helping to reduce carbon intensity of electricity use across the board. And that's happening both in the commercial and residential sectors. We have the highest green power participation in the United States. And again, as I mentioned, accounting for 10% of total electricity sales. Natural gas has really spiked in 2017. That is the impact of a really cold winter that year and increased residential and commercial heating. So we do expect that to come down with 2018 and 2019 with more moderate winters. Gasoline sales have been relatively flat. We're really making up a difference there with the ethanol that we're requiring to be blended with the gasoline sales. So you can see total sales are about the same as they were in 1990, even though we've added 38% more people. And people are just using a lot less gasoline. So that has come down, almost 30% lower per person. And so that's because we're buying much more efficient vehicles than we were driving in 1990. Metro area VMT has been flat. So we're seeing more people on the road driving more, but per person driving is pretty much stayed consistent, at least since 2010. I've added this here to look a little bit about the impact of price on gasoline sales. Here you can see that with a 50% increase in gasoline price, we got about a 10% reduction, 10 to 15% reduction in gasoline sales. So there is some relationship there, although it is pretty minor. Contributing to the overall change in emissions, I think really the growth in jobs have really been a big factor here, as well as the changes in price of fuels. Not only have jobs grown pretty significantly since 2010, but we've seen significant growth in diesel fuel use and propane fuel use. And so I just want to wrap up. I'm moving pretty quickly here, but I want to give you some takeaways. So we had some work from ICLEI to look at the contribution to changes in our emissions over time. And I know this is small. It's not intended for you to read it. But you can see some measures increased our emissions, like population growth. But a lot of different things corresponded to reduce those emissions. The number one thing was carbon intensity of the grid. And again, you can see that 10% swing in emissions depending on how much hydro generation there was in a given year. So number one, carbon intensity of the grid. Number two, the second biggest contributing factor was the carbon intensity of transportation fuels. A lot of opportunity there, as you saw from that one chart. We've only had a 2% reduction in carbon intensity of fuels. Number three, VMT per person, so reducing how much people have to drive means people need to live closer to where they work. Kilowatt hours per job, so energy efficiency in the commercial sector. 1/2 of those total electricity sales are from commercial electricity use. So that's pretty significant and a real opportunity for us to focus there. Kilowatt hours per household, again, old bread and butter energy efficiency remains as important today as it was 30 years ago, as well as the therms per household there. So what does this mean in terms of the type of actions that we would take and how would we get to net zero by 2050? Here I have a handful of examples. These aren't policy proposals. They're just give you a sense of how we can get at this. So significantly reducing VMT, things like zero emission zones, equitable pricing for mobility, also known as congestion pricing. And with that, I'm going to hand off to Andrea to talk about 100% renewable.
Before you do that, can you go back to that last slide just for 1 second?
Sure.
So I want to focus on the VMT reduction. This is an area I spend a lot of my time in personally. I tend to frame this in terms of our TSP, which basically has two curves. It has the growth in population and economic activity, and then it has a mode shift curve. And the dire prediction is if the mode shift curve is, the slope isn't as steep as the population growth curve is, then things get congested, right? And we're seeing that on our streets today. Everybody's observed that our streets are congested with automobiles, and we're seeing the same thing reflected in the energy usage from that sector.
Yep.
So obviously I go out and argue for bicycles and transit and all those good things. Often what I hear back is, well, we just need to electrify the system. If we replaced all those with EVs, we'd be in great shape. And obviously that won't solve congestion, but it seems to me it also doesn't, it helps on the energy side, but it takes a long time to replace the fleet. And if you're relying on the grid is still 60% fossil fuels, right? So do you have any advice on how to position those issues of getting people to drive less versus just changing the fuel sources for the vehicles? How would you talk about that?
Well, so we're working on a decarbonization pathway that will articulate that much clearer, probably coming in early 2020. So on one hand, I want to have that conversation with you when we have that data.
Keep it to 1 minute or less, please.
Yeah, so I would say the efficiency piece of it becomes really important in mode shift, reducing VMT, getting people out of their cars. We know that vehicles, my car was made in 2000. I'm hoping I can get a few more years out of it. So they have a long life. And so we can't count on a full fleet replacement to electric vehicles by 2050. That's going to have to be phased in along with greening the grid over that time. So we have to do both of these things, and we have to do them in parallel.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe that's a good segue.
Yeah, perfect segue.
I'm Andrea Jacob with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I don't have slides, but I have a handout, so I'm going to just send it around. So Kyle stole some of my thunder, so maybe I'll go even quicker. 2 years ago in 2017, City Council passed Resolution 37289, which was the 100% renewable energy resolution. And this speaks to the bulk of our carbon emissions, not the sequestration piece, but everything related to buildings, both electricity and heat, power and heat, and also transportation. So that resolution also required BPS to come back every 2 years to report to City Council on our progress. So we are preparing to go to Council on December 12th at a time certain with our first biennial report on what we've done in the last couple of years. But to reiterate, what the resolution actually says that we should do, it sets a couple of different goals and target years. So by 2035, it says that we will be 100% renewable in the electricity sector. So to answer Chris's question, we really need to make sure that grid is 100% renewable as soon as possible. So as we start shifting everything off of fossil fuels to electricity, that's renewable power, not brown power. Another really important part by 2035 is that 2% of this new renewable energy generation will be community-based and community-owned. And then by 2050, we have a little bit of a longer time horizon to get to 100% renewable transportation and heating sectors. And then also by that time, we are intending to have 10% of our renewable energy generation be community-based and community-owned. So Kyle went through some of this, but I just think as a primer on what does 100% renewable energy mean, you hear a lot of different terms. There's 100% renewables, there's net zero, there's decarbonization. For all intents and purposes, they're basically the same thing. 100% renewable energy, though, really speaks to the energy piece, not the part about taking carbon out of the atmosphere or dealing with the emissions from the waste system, but really everything that has to do with heating and powering our buildings and how we get around. And so in the literature, that's really now really not questioned in the scientific or engineering community around how do you decarbonize, how do you take all the carbon out of the economy, is really based on 4 pillars. And that first one is efficiency, both in buildings. So we have to, any fossil fuels that we use, we just have to use less of them, whether it's in our cars or our buildings, reducing that in building energy use or reducing vehicle miles traveled and increasing mode shift. That's really important in the buildings and foundational because it's usually the least expensive way to get there. So no matter what we do, we have to use less of everything. The second pillar is clean electricity. We need 100% or very close to 100% clean electric grid. And we have really progressive utility companies in Portland that are hoping to work with us and the community on getting there. On the transportation side, we have to transition all of the fossil fuels to renewable transportation fuels, whether that's renewable natural gas, ethanol, renewable diesel, or electricity. And we have to make sure that those renewable fuels have low life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. And then the fourth piece, which is pretty new to us, is on the building electrification side, which means that in our buildings where we usually heat our space and our water with natural gas or other types of fossil fuels, that needs to also shift to electric at a certain time. And we need to start getting more clear with the market about when those transitions need to start happening. So that's the technical side of net zero or decarbonization or 100% renewables. So those 4 pillars are pretty well established. What's less established is what sequence this happens in, who pays, who's harmed, who benefits. It's really the social and economic and political considerations around these policy interventions rather than what the policy interventions are. But I want to also mention that a really core piece of the 100% renewables resolution is about justice and a just transition, which is language that we're starting to use more and more in our climate work and in our buildings and energy and transportation work. So in the resolution, justice is expressed in a lot of different ways. I should also mention that the resolution itself has 26 be it resolved or individual directives, so that's pretty wide ranging. It covers a lot of ground, and a lot of them are around justice. So how that's expressed is really a set of priorities around community-based development of renewable energy, which I mentioned, capacity building and investment in frontline communities, utilization of minority and women-owned businesses in clean energy development projects, and resources for training and hiring people from within communities of color and women in low-income communities that have traditionally been underrepresented in renewable energy and energy efficiency. So the resolution, like I mentioned, has those 26 directives. I think they fall into some broader themes. One I've already mentioned around community-based ownership of renewables, equitable workforce development, contracting and jobs around just transition. There's directives to intervene as the city in important state and policy and regulatory proceedings. So in the legislature, at the Public Utility Commission, which is something my team is quite involved in, definitely directed us to collaborate with and also influence the utilities to stop investing in fossil fuel infrastructure, to maximize energy efficiency programs and investments in renewable energy and a bunch of other wonky energy things like demand response and storage, which I won't get into, and also to focus on energy burden, reducing energy burden. Transportation electrification is in there. There's a bit about what we do with our own city operations and making sure that we have the greenest energy that we can buy for city operations, green infrastructure development in neighborhoods, and a few directives around just general governance and creating more avenues for people to engage in climate work with the city, especially youth, Oregon tribes, people of color, and low-income people. So that's the resolution. The report on December 12th will talk about what we found. I don't want to necessarily, well, I can answer questions around it, but I also don't want to take up too much time going through all of the findings. But I think it can be summed up as we've done some pretty good stuff. Kyle highlighted some of our successes. We have not nearly gone fast enough, far enough. And if we're going to hit those net zero carbon goals, everything has to just ramp up like on steroids like 20,000 million times. So it's a lot of work. And we also haven't really been effectively resourced to do it. So that's another piece that we need to work on that I think we're starting to get more intentional about.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner McNair is a subject matter expert in this area, so I'll give her one question now, and if we get done before 4 o'clock, we can come back to all of you with more questions.
Commissioner Manera.
Remind me how the 100% renewable resolution deals with legacy hydro.
My understanding is that we, unlike our state renewable portfolio standard, which does not count legacy hydro as renewable, our resolution does recognize the carbon benefits of existing hydro. So we're not looking for any new, but we recognize that the hydro system does deliver carbon-free energy in our region, in our city.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to take a few minutes just to give you a sense of where we're at with our existing climate action plan in terms of implementing that, talk to you a little bit about the climate emergency that we've been working on and how it all fits together. I also realized that in my introductory comments, I neglected to mention, and I'm sure Mike would point this out to me, that we're really focusing these presentations on reducing carbon emissions and on sort of that piece of the puzzle. resilience and adapting to the impacts of climate change, which we know we will be experiencing, even if we're super successful at reducing carbon emissions on this trajectory. We know we will be seeing impacts, and there's a whole body of work that is getting underway and has been underway for a few years to look at adaptation and resilience. And I think that would definitely be something, if you're interested, that we could come back and sort of give you a briefing sort of through that lens of this work. And so I just wanted to mention up front, even though I forgot to mention up front, Mike, that this is only half of the pie. So I think you all know we have the city has had a series of climate action plans over the years, starting in 1993. Our most recent one was in 2015. It contains a little over 170 different actions that the city and county would be doing to both reduce carbon emissions and to prepare for the impacts of climate change. And our climate action plan is really focused primarily on actions that city government and county government would be taking. So it's not meant to really be the actions that community members or businesses or others would be taking, but it's really pretty focused on our work, both on a policy, program, and operational side of things. So this slide that is in front of you is just a snapshot of sort of how we're doing on those 170 plus actions. You can see that about 3/4 of those actions have either been completed, which is in the green, or are on track for completion. And then there's a fair number that are facing obstacles. So, I'll talk to you a little more about what those sorts of things look like, and then a handful that we haven't been able to get started. So you go to the next slide. So the Climate Action Plan is organized by chapters that are focused on different topic areas, and this just gives you a sense of what the status of the actions in those different topic areas looks like, and also you can see sort of the relative number of actions that live in any of those chapters. As we've been looking at this, we're in the process of developing a progress report. So these are sort of draft findings, but one of the things that we've noticed is a lot of the actions that are in the Climate Action Plan are things that are ongoing. And so it's actually hard to ever say it's completed. And so it's sort of forever trapped in this on track category. If it's a program that is sort of being implemented year after year, there's really no end date to it. Like a new policy you adopt a new policy and you can check that it's completed. So a lot of those on track items are things that are just ongoing and will be ongoing for a long time. The actions that are facing obstacles, there's a variety of reasons that something might be facing obstacles. Oftentimes, it might be because we are working with partners on something, whether it's Metro or the State Transportation Department, or we're needing to rely on the federal government related to car, efficiency standards. Or so sometimes we're reliant on someone else to do their piece of the work, and there might be some obstacles there. Sometimes we for example, you'll see a lot of facing obstacles for food and agriculture. The staff person that we had that was focused on those topics retired, and we made the decision to repurpose that personnel to focus on energy issues instead of food issues, and so that means we're sort of short-staffed in that area. In terms of things that are not started, often that might have to do with sequencing of work. Like we need some other action to happen before the next action can happen. Sometimes it's related to funding. There's something that we identified that we needed to do, but just because it is living in the Climate Action Plan doesn't mean that money came with it. And so sometimes that funding is just hard to come by. For example, to do some of the energy efficiency upgrades we want to do in our city facilities, there's a backlog of deferred maintenance that sort of needs to be addressed before we might be able to do those energy efficiency investments. So that sort of gives you a sense of, by and large, 75% of our actions are well on their way to being completed or already completed, and we're struggling in a few areas. Go to the next slide, Kyle. So in terms of sort of how the various moving pieces fit together, the blue arrow here is what we sort of have talked about so far, which is the 2015 Climate Action Plan and the 100% renewable. So that really lays out the map for city bureaus in terms of what we're focused on and what we're moving towards implementing.
The green arrow, we have plans to update our climate action plan. And so our goal is really to, and Elisa is going to talk about what that future vision of that climate work looks like, but is to really be more centering community and particularly frontline communities in that work. So as we work to get those carbon reductions that Kyle and Andrea were talking about, that we're doing it in a way that's really benefiting communities that have been left behind from our previous work. And in the middle there, we've been asked to develop a climate emergency declaration. And what we're currently viewing this is really an opportunity to catalyze important actions that have sort of come to light since the 2015 Climate Action Plan was adopted, and that also sets the stage for us to really pivot the climate work of the city towards being community-centered. In the meantime, in the yellow box there's so much happening that can inform that work. Everything from the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund that is being designed and getting ready to launch later this year, the Zero Cities project that Oriana is working on, community solar projects, work that we're doing around those emissions that come from elsewhere, from the consumption of goods and services here in Portland. So there's a lot happening that's already underway that can inform both the climate emergency and the future update to the climate action plan. So our original timeline for the climate emergency was moving at a pretty fast clip and didn't really enable us to do a lot of community engagement around it. So we have extended that deadline and are going back and particularly focusing on getting feedback and perspectives from frontline communities, communities of color, low-income populations, as well as youth, to help shape what that climate emergency should look like, that kind of bridges between where we're at now and where we're going in the future. And so we hope to have something in that area come together early in the new year. So with that, I will maybe turn it over to Elisa to share with you our vision for where we're going in the future.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair Schultz and Commissioners. My name is Elisa Kane. I'm the Climate Action Manager with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. 10 years ago, if I said the words climate change to you, what image might come to mind? I'll just jump ahead. I propose, things like industry and smokestacks, certainly icebergs, melting icebergs, maybe polar bears on icebergs as well. Now, when I say climate change to you, I think we have pretty ready images right in our own backyard. So look at this picture taken last summer, very high heat day with a lot of air pollution. We see weather forecasts like this, breaking records day after day. I learned a new term 2 years ago, heat storm, which was something where you experience heat over 100 degrees where it does not cool down at night. And our PGE sent us a notice saying you are experiencing a heat storm now and you need to prepare for it. So we're in a different time of year. We're in a different phase of how we experience climate in Portland. And then lastly, I think climate change is a lot about this. In September, there was a climate strike worldwide. Many thousands of Portland's youth showed up to participate in that strike, and certainly youth of color representing frontline communities had a very large presence and outspoken opportunity to voice their concerns over their future. So as we've talked about, we've had 25 years of climate action in Portland, and it's yielded some really important results. We've seen our emissions go down, and although we're plateauing, there's still a lot of work to be done. So one of the things that we wanted to do in response to where we are as a community around climate is to rethink how we're going to do climate action in Portland. And we've been trying to address things with a different mindset, knowing that what we've been doing in the past to get where we are is not going to work in the future. And we're not going to certainly get the deep dive emission reductions that we need to be able to meet our goals that Kyle expressed. So I'll take, for example, just to give you a sense of what we're thinking, this transportation number. We know that sector emissions are now 8% over 1990 levels. So in the past, what we might say is people need to get out of their cars and get onto the bus. So that's a very logical way of thinking about how to reduce carbon emissions. We know that 59% reductions happen when people get out of their cars and get onto mass transit, whether that be MAX or bus or streetcar. So we've seen this image before where you can cut congestion, certainly getting people onto a bus reduces those emissions, and even better if it's on a fossil fuel-free bus. So just a quick pop quiz here, keep us alive on this afternoon. How many all-electric buses does Portland have? Okay, we got a winner over here. We've got 5. How many are in the U.S.? I'll speed this up. There are 300 in all of the U.S. How many are in China? 400, over 425,000 electric buses. So we know it's possible to have electric buses serving our needs. So getting people on the bus is important. Electric buses is great if that's an option. Having frequent service to where people are living, working, and playing is also equally important. And if you've ever taken a bus from Columbia Boulevard and 122nd south to Holgate, I will say that concept of frequent service is not quite on par with what we would need to be able to get people on the bus and moving quickly and swiftly throughout our city. So rethinking climate action in Portland, we're trying to use approaches of other similar equity and inclusion initiatives. One that has really kind of worked for us to reframe our thinking is John Powell's concept of targeted universalism. This is setting universal goals with targeted actions. We're also using notions inspired by just transition, traditional knowledge, regenerative economics, and more. And this, as a team, we've been working through a lot of these issues using new lenses to rethink our work here. So let's rethink this in terms of targeted universalism. Let's say everyone can ride the bus safely. Is that something we can agree with as a statement that sounds like a good idea? Okay, we'll go with that. So that question then asks, who isn't safe riding the bus? And we need to answer that. So we'll start off with this picture. This is not the one you see in the brochures for Portland, but we know, for example, in the Cully neighborhood, 39% of the streets are insufficient compared to 19% citywide. So we have some real inequities just in our streets alone, but certainly in certain neighborhoods are impacted more. Then if you're in a mobility device or in a wheelchair device, crossing the street becomes a very legitimate issue safely. Either there's not enough curb cuts, there's certainly sidewalks that disappear, come and go, force you into traffic if you're in this. We ask, can this person ride the bus safely? I would say probably not from this street. Moving on, we've seen these photos, certainly sidewalks that are non-existent, unimproved roadways, and I think even the cat is having second thoughts about crossing this street. So then once you get to the bus stop, can you read the sign? Is the language of something you can access? Is the numbers large enough? Or is the wayfinding sufficient? I would ask you what that red arrow is pointing to. Where is that going to send me if I needed to get to this bus stop? So I think we have some improvements to make there. And then certainly we know that the experience for Portlanders who are actually walking on the streets of Portland is not the same. PBOT, Portland Bureau of Transportation study, Walking While Black, did some surveying of Black Portlanders and their experience walking on the streets. They found that Black Portlanders are more than 3 times as likely to wait at a crosswalk when they have the right-of-way to be able to safely cross that walk, to be yielded to by a driver, and they're more likely to be stopped by police. And they've found that police stops for Black people walking on the streets of Portland is more likely. We also know from our headlines that it is unsafe to ride the bus. We had a tragic and traumatic event of people being killed on the MAX train. That we know that's not an everyday activity, but Islamophobia, homophobia, racism, bigotry, misogyny is an experience for people on the bus every day. And there are people who will not ride the bus in Portland and have said so to me, just unsolicited, that I will not take the bus. So if we want to get more people on the bus, we have some more work to do. So what can we do? What is the city responsible for? I will acknowledge that the city does not run TriMet. We are not the transit agency, but we do a lot of things around the edges of that, including we develop and maintain the infrastructure that allows people to safely get to the bus. This is an improved bus stop where people have shelter. The signage is reasonable, at least it can be seen, and there's a pull-off place where people can safely get on and off the bus. We also, as this commission knows very well, manage the land use laws, so building around places that are served by transportation and making sure those places are affordable. and accessible to the transportation that already exists, and then really working with TriMet to identify those routes for where people are moving to, either through displacement or gentrification, that those communities need to be served by frequent, clean, and healthy and safe transportation. Lastly, we've heard a lot that there are requests for specifically youth passes and potentially more broadly a fareless transportation system. I know the city is actively considering providing free youth passes. It's something that's been a long time in the conversation, a long time in the works, and if we want to get people on the bus, we need to reduce those barriers to getting people on the bus. We also have to have a real conversation about how we're creating community. And the city has a lot of different community events and engagement strategies, and certainly where we do that and how we do that's going to be important. And then, I think that the conversation around police profiling, while maybe not the top of the list of climate actions, is something that we need to bring to the fore. We need to look at this more systemically. We need to go way more upstream and have the conversation about why are we seeing the results that we're getting? And I think it's time for us to start asking those different questions. So what does climate action look like when we achieve our carbon goals and center the priorities of frontline communities? That's a very basic question to start as we look to update our climate action plan the next year or so. And then how do we create equitable community benefits that drastically reduce carbon emissions? This is a kind of flipping of the statement that we've had in the past where we've said, how can we reduce carbon emissions and benefit community? If we lead with community benefits, my guess is we're going to get different outcomes out of that, and maybe we'll get to the deeper seated issues that we need to address to be able to really drastically reduce carbon emissions. And then finally, I'll leave with this quote, and you can tell me if you know who this is from, about solving a crisis if we don't treat it as a crisis, and then really looking at the solutions within the system. And if those solutions aren't there, maybe it's the system that is at fault. Any ideas of who this might come from? So she's made a lot of news recently, and I think she has it right, because when we start to think about doing things harder and faster, which we know is important, we also have to really understand that we can't just keep pressing on the systems that aren't working for us. And that when we think about climate, we need to think about it differently, and we need to make connections that we haven't in the past. And we need to really challenge ourselves as we say we need more people to take the bus, and really ask the questions about why people aren't doing that and what we can do to change that. So I'll leave it at there. We can start with some questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Very much appreciate the focus on equity as part of the solution. And sadly, I'll note that I believe TriMet is on the verge of a budget decision to remove youth pass from park rows. I think that would be very regrettable if it happened. I think I speak for the whole commission in saying that we'd love to see you guys way more often. We spend too much of our time on these dry, not fun zoning decisions, and we know how critical the work that you're doing is. So if we can set a tempo where we get you here, any one of these briefings could have gone on for an hour by itself. If we could get you here on a regular basis so we can spend that kind of time, I think we would very much appreciate that. So thank you for going so quickly. So we have a few minutes for questions, so I'll open it up, and I shoved Mike's hand down before, so I'll let him start.
Thank you, Chair. Well, definitely as part of that, looking forward to the climate preparation, climate adaptation end of things. And when you talk about the need to increase carbon sequestration as important as the equity component, and certainly is, particularly with respect to urban heat island, green infrastructure initiatives across the city are going to be one of the things that help us to achieve that. So I look forward to that conversation. And just for colleagues on the commission, we have been talking, I know Eli and the chair and I have been talking with BES, PSU, Institute for Sustainable Solutions. And I think what I'd like to see us do is actually be conveners for this sort of information for the broader public, however we may be able to do that. So it's outside of the regular commission meetings at times. I have to ask, you quoted John Powell. We had John Powell here in '94 talking about housing issues. I'd love to get him back, assuming he's still out there circulating, to Portland on this issue, because he was a hugely powerful voice for equity, particularly related to affordable housing back in '94. That's all I have to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other folks? Eli.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I agree with Chris, what he said I won't repeat. I would love to hear what the Planning Sustainability Commission can do in support of this stuff, especially when there's policy decisions to recommend on that may be clear policy and more difficult politics. And I'm curious whether building electrification is part of the climate emergency measure going to City Council, or if that's figured out yet. And one last comment along the lines of what Mike Houck said is, in terms of convening, I feel that, at least in terms of the building department, I'm a big fan of mode switch for transportation and fuel switch for buildings. And on the building side, there are some legitimate things to think. We have to think through about the impacts on people who have natural gas who don't have very much money to switch. California is a lot further along than we are in Oregon, and I've got colleagues down there who might be able to come up here to share some thoughts on the strategy that they've been working on to make sure that as fossil fuel, natural gas particularly, does a little death spiral, prices go up, people at the bottom end don't get hurt. So I hope that conversation is part of the conversation we have locally, and that we bring in experts from other places.
Maybe in response to that, I can't say at this point whether or not that will be in the climate emergency. We're not sure really what the shape the climate emergency might take at this point. That being said, it's clearly a conversation that we need to have and needs to be explored. And so, it could be that having the PSC help us work through that would be a great way for you all to provide assistance in helping us have that conversation and move those issues forward and explore those very issues that you identify as well. I don't know would you add anything, Andrea? Okay, no.
Steph, I think I saw your hand.
If I may, I would love specifically how we as a commission can work on developing comments related to, for example, the T2020 bill that very specifically related to climate action plan and our work as a commission. And I think of that a lot, having been on the ODOT Region 1 Area Commission on Transportation and seeing, I'll just state it bluntly, ODOT's fiscally constrained RTP list as being a very expensive box of Band-Aids, of short-term solutions that omit longer-term needs. So I think that related to transportation and our upcoming significant transportation investments. Yes, bus stops should be palaces. Thank you.
Okay. Oriana, do you have your hand up?
I'll let Ben go.
Ben? All right.
So, well, thank you for the presentation, first of all, very clear, and I like how you kept it succinct. We heard that transportation emissions have risen, and I think part of that is there's more cars, even if they're 30% more efficient. So as we switch to electric, the autonomous vehicles, potentially fully automated and perhaps shared, do you think we're doing all we can to channel that conversation in the right direction?
No.
We are at least as far as BPS, PBOT's definitely these issues are on their radar. They're trying to work through them, and we are trying to support them in that. That's part of one of the things we're looking at with the climate action plan. Right now, we're on about every 5 years we update our climate action plan. And these last 5 years have shown us, particularly in that sector, how quickly things can change, both in terms of just the way the congestion is ramping up so quickly and those new technologies that are coming. And whether it's the technology themselves, things like Uber and Lyft and ride sharing, and things are moving and more dynamic. And we need a way to do our climate action planning that is more dynamic, more iterative, and lets us adjust on the fly a little bit rather than saying, well, in 5 years when we update the plan, we'll figure that out. And really, so when it comes to things like automated vehicles, that push that PBOT really has been leading at a national scale to make sure that those vehicles, that everyone's not buying their own automated vehicle that's sitting in their driveway, but that they're shared and that they're electric. And, those things I think
if we can get ahead of them fast enough, we can do the policy interventions to sort of drive it in one way instead of the other. But it requires that we find a way to be more nimble and quicker to make those adjustments. At the same time, one of the tensions that we're really feeling is how do we do bigger, bolder, faster action and do that in a way that centers community and community leadership, and finding a way to have that alignment and build that capacity both within the city to be able to do a better job of centering community voices in that work, and understanding those issues so that we can move faster and be bolder as well. So there's some tension there, and there's a need to sort of be a little looser and more iterative with the work as well.
I'll editorialize a little bit. So I think it's hard to understand what the impacts of all the change that's happening is. I think many of us thought with the TNCs, Uber and Lyft, that by being shared, on-demand transportation, we would see that result in a drop in vehicle ownership and maybe some beneficial effects. But with the benefit of a little hindsight, it's not pretty clear. They just increased VMT, and they probably robbed transit more than anything else, and did not do so in an equitable way. Right. So I think a lot of us think that the core of it is pricing. You had congestion pricing in your slides, and of course that will introduce a whole raft of equity issues. And very happy that PBOT has formed a committee on equitable pricing. I think we're definitely going to have to navigate that to get to our goals. So, all right, open it back up, Oriana.
Yeah, what do you need in order to start doing more community-based work that you just mentioned?
Maybe I'll start to speak to that, and then Elisa, if you have some additions. I think one of the biggest needs we have is to build the staff capacity to think about this work differently. A lot of what Elisa articulated in her presentation about digging deeper and asking different questions, that's a different way of doing our work, and it requires that we, as staff, build those muscles to be able to think about things differently. It also means that the staff that are doing that work, who have, right now, if you look at us, we're not a very diverse group of folks who are leading this work. And so I think greater diversity in terms of the leadership of the climate work at the city, both within the Bureau as well as other bureaus. And then just doing the work to build the relationships and trust with community, and to find a way to get past just sort of asking the same questions over and over again, but and to also, I think, find a way to take what community lifts up as a priority and move that forward, rather than we've often in the past and even today come to community with what we think the priorities are. And so we sort of out of the gates are not sort of best positioned to do that work differently. Would you add anything to it?
I think that's pretty well articulated, but even today, Commissioner, we were talking about moving at the speed of trust. And so we do have to reconcile the fact that we as a city and county work in a political environment. We also have to recognize that there's community collaboration and coordination that is happening well beyond our city purview, that when we come and sync up together, that we move on different timelines. And so we are going to have to change the pace of this work. I think we've talked about being more flexible with our climate action plans, not being a 5-year plan and being more of we don't even know the appropriate timeline, but rethinking how we're even doing that. So that's one piece of it, is just trying to come together with timelines and capacity. And I will also recognize that the community that's working on this is at well over capacity, and that we as a city can't keep saying, we need you to help us with this, we need you to help us with this. We have to find a way to build that foundation together so that we can all do our work in the time fashion that we need to. Then I will also just say that we need to resource our work differently. So it's not just staff, it's how we resource the community engagement level of that. And we saw from PSEF that there's a lot of capacity within community to make drastic changes in how we do our climate work. This next phase, especially if we are going to do deep dive engagement, does need to be resourced, and the people who are coming to that table need to be resourced as the experts and professionals that they are, and the city needs to find a way to fund that.
Last call for questions. All right. Thank you very much, and let's see you much more often.
Yeah, so I'll work with the team and the co-chairs to sort of like map out maybe what that looks like. I'm Mike, I definitely want to be responsive to making sure that we bring the adaptation, the preparation sort of element of this work to the table. So maybe we start with focusing on that, and then we'll map out a plan from there. And I think in the meantime, if you think of things where either things are coming to you where you're like, I wonder sort of what the climate lens of this might be, or things that you would like to learn more about. There's a lot of things moving and changing in the sphere of work that we do, and to the extent that we can share that with you and build capacity together so that we can chart a course forward together and rely on you to help us do that, I think that would be great.
One thing that happened in an officers meeting discussion is that as we get zoning code updates, getting your perspective on them from a climate lens could be helpful so that might be one example.
Good thought. Okay. Thank you. Then we are adjourned.